Hey guys, tonight we're entering a world where getting high isn't illegal, immoral, or even frowned upon, at least not by the monk handing you a steaming wooden cup. You're in a stone monastery, candlelit and echoing with Gregorian chants, and the scent curling from your drink is equal parts comforting and suspicious. Something herbal, sure, but something else, too, like hay that dreamed of being pepper. You glance up. The monk nods, serene. You sip. And then the walls start to breathe just a little, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've traveled back to somewhere between the 9th and 11th centuries. The place? A Benedictine monastery nestled in the green folds of Central Europe. The lifestyle? Quiet, devout, deeply routine. But here's a twist, this monastery has a garden, and that garden is less about cucumbers and more about consciousness. It's tended by a monk named Brother Thomas. Not Brother Thomas the heretic, though maybe he should be. His robes are modest, his head shaved in the classic tonsure, and his fingers stained green from decades of tending to his precious herbs for clarity. Some are kitchen staples. Others, not so much. You follow him past rows of wormwood, mandrake, belladonna, and poppies. Yes, poppies. The kind that would later power empires and wars. But here, they're carefully dried, steeped, and administered under the vague but holy-sounding name aqua mirabilis, miracle water. A few drops before meditation. Allegedly divine, historians still argue whether the monks knew exactly what they were brewing or if they genuinely thought these herbs were just strong tea with a side of God. Some say it was intentional mysticism. Others argue the effect. An Old English medical manuscript from around the 10th century, and then there's the monastery's prized dream pillow, a linen sack stuffed with mugwort and lavender, tucked under the novice monks' heads to encourage holy visions. You try it. The dreams come quickly and vividly, saints with glowing eyes, animals speaking in rhyme, a chapel that turns into a forest. You wake up groggy, unsure what was real and what was a dream. One fringe theory, dismissed by most historians but never quite disproved, is that some monastic sects deliberately cultivated altered states as part of their devotion. Not unlike certain Hindu sadhus or Sufi mystics, they believed that glimpses of the divine could be induced. Through fasting. Through chanting. Through, yes, chemical assistance, but even outside the fringe, it's a documented fact that certain herbs were used to treat melancholy, sleeplessness, and spiritual unrest. And if someone accidentally brewed the valerian root a little too long, well, at least he wasn't sinning. Probably, the lines between medicine, magic, and mysticism blur here. You sip your third cup. It tastes earthy and sweet. The room seems to tilt slightly. You find yourself staring at the stained glass window, which now appears to be moving, just subtly. A ripple. A suggestion. Suddenly, a bell tolls. Loud. Bronze. Startling, you jerk upright. Was that real? The monks file in for Compline, the final prayer of the night. Their robes rustle like leaves. The air smells of beeswax and damp stone. You follow them, slow and uncertain, your feet oddly light. During the service, something strange happens. The chants begin to echo inside your chest, like you're not hearing them but being them. Brother Thomas kneels beside you. His breath smells faintly of wormwood and honey. You wonder, are you hallucinating? Or are you finally seeing what these monks claim they've seen all along? Historians still debate whether medieval mysticism was a product of sincere spiritual experience or a side effect of isolation, malnutrition, and an enthusiastic herbal regimen. But to you, in this moment, it hardly matters. The stars seem to blink in slow motion outside the chapel. The world feels thin, as if the veil between here and somewhere else could be peeled back with one whispered amen. Later, in your straw-filled cot, the effects fade slowly. Your heartbeat steadies. Your limbs sink. Your mind floats like smoke over candlelight. As you drift off, one final image hovers: Brother Thomas, silhouetted against the moonlit herb garden, humming to his plants like old friends. And maybe they are. You wake sometime near dawn. The stone cell around you is cold. But your body is warm. The last threads of a dream still cling to your skin, something about walking barefoot through an orchard where the trees whispered scripture. You sit up slowly, uncertain whether that dream came from your own mind or from the monk's tea, still brewing in your bloodstream. The monastery is quiet now. Even the birds haven't started. You shuffle quietly into the cloister, the cold flagstones kissing your soles. There's mist in the garden, and it clings to everything: the rosemary, the foxglove, the suspiciously well-fed cat snoozing under the angelica bush. And Brother Thomas, of course. Already awake, already snipping herbs with practiced calm, you ask him about last night. Not directly, there's a monastic etiquette to all this. But you hint. He smiles. And finally, with a little smirk that barely lifts the corner of his mouth, he says, all healing begins with surrender. Cryptic, unhelpful, and deeply monk-like, but he hands you a sprig of mugwort and suggests you steep it in cold water for clarity of thought. Don't boil it, he warns, unless you want to fly. You blink. He winks. It's not just this one monastery, you learn. Across medieval Europe, there are whispers of others, cloisters tucked into hillsides in France, Ireland, and northern Italy, where monks quietly experimented with what they called physica, the study of natural remedies. In some, scholars were encouraged to observe how certain plants altered perception. In others, anything stronger than a mint leaf would have earned you a week of silent prayer. The contradictions weren't always about ethics. Sometimes they were about access. Your average peasant didn't have the time or literacy to write a treatise on the psychoactive qualities of dittany of Crete. But in monasteries, where libraries grew fat with Greek and Arabic texts, monks translated, copied, and annotated knowledge, some of it harmless, some of it questionably holy. There's one surviving letter, dated to the 11th century, in which a monk complains that another brother is using too much fennel in his tonics, producing dreams that interfere with matins. It's a small line, barely a footnote in the scroll. But it tells you everything. They knew. They argued. They debated dosages, and maybe, like you, they sometimes overdid it. You return to your cot one last time, sliding between scratchy wool and rough linen. Your breath is steady. The faint bitterness of mugwort still tingles on your tongue. And somewhere beyond the cloister walls, the sun begins to rise, not bright and golden, but shy and gray, stretching slowly into a sky that looks like wet parchment. You pull the covers up. Tonight, you drank from a wooden cup that changed the color of candlelight, and tomorrow, there's a rumor about a nearby apothecary who bottles madness in drops. But that's a story for another night. You're in a narrow alley, somewhere in a medieval city that doesn't bother to give you a street sign, or much ventilation. It smells like stew, horse, and something floral that might be rot. Or perfume. Ahead of you, wedged between a butcher's stall and a thatched tavern, is a crooked little shop whose sign reads, Apothecaries, and beneath that, in much smaller Latin, he who might save you or make it worse. Inside, you're hit by a wall of scent, spices, sour vinegar, sweet resins, and something that smells faintly like burnt almonds and poor decisions. A bell tinkles overhead. No one greets you, then a head pops up from behind the counter, a man in a stained wool robe, spectacles perched low on a long nose. And an expression that says he has absolutely had it with your nonsense and you haven't even spoken yet. This is your apothecary. Well, technically, he's a guild-licensed medical artisan with training in botany, humors, and controlled doses of things that could drop a mule. But in practice, He's the town's pharmacist, shrink, and low-key pusher, depending on the customer and the season, looking for clarity, sleep, or inspiration. He asks dryly, already rummaging through drawers that creak with the weight of powdered roots, desiccated frogs, and rolled herbs tied with human hair, you hesitate. He assumes inspiration. A small paper packet is pushed across the counter. Inside, henbane. Dried and crushed. For dreams. Use a pinch. Or don't. But don't write letters to the bishop afterward. You're not the first pilgrim to seek something more than leeches and garlic. Medieval apothecaries walked a razor's edge, authorized to sell medicines but often moonlighting in substances that technically weren't forbidden. Just frowned upon. Quietly. Until they worked. Henbane, for instance, is a hallucinogen. So is mandrake. So is datura. All featured in the apothecary's bestiary of barely safe remedies. You'd think they'd hide these behind a shelf, maybe locked in a box. But no. This shop flaunts its wares. Bundles of dried nightshade dangle next to licorice root. Belladonna, beautiful lady, in Latin, sits beside rosewater, like a dare. Historians still argue whether apothecaries of the 13th and 14th centuries understood the psychotropic effects of these herbs, or whether they simply noted that certain customers came back less sad and more starry-eyed. But even the most conservative herbals included recipes that, when followed, caused auditory hallucinations, memory lapses, or states of artificial calm. You take a seat while the apothecary prepares a tincture of valerian, hops, and just a shaving of opium. For sleep, he says, grinding with slow, deliberate care. He does not smile. You begin to suspect that customer deaths are not uncommon, but refunds are. He adds a drop of wine to the mixture, fermented, spiced, and likely stronger than what passes for Holy Communion, and hands you a clay cup. You sip. It's bitter. Deep. Comforting. And immediately too much, the room tilts. The apothecary's wall of drying herbs now resembles a forest in winter. His mortar and pestle seem to hum, or maybe growl. And you're reasonably sure the tiny green bottle labeled elixir of thought just winked at you. He sits beside you, hands folded. See anything yet? You nod. Slowly, good. That's your soul. Say hello. Jokes aside, this wasn't recreational, at least. Not openly. Medieval medicine was rooted in the four humors: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. An imbalance caused all illness. So if your melancholy refused to lift, the apothecary might prescribe something that made you feel different, even if you didn't fully know why. Poppy syrup, known as diacodium, was sold to soothe infants and calm the dying. It was cheap. It worked. And if you happened to hallucinate a choir of saints while sipping it? Bonus. One surviving apothecary ledger from Paris in the 1300s lists sleep tonics made of poppy seed, lettuce extract, vinegar, and rose oil. Sounds innocent, right? Until you try standing up afterward. Even nutmeg, now a spice you grate over pie, was considered a mild euphoriant when consumed in medieval quantities. Apothecaries imported it from faraway spice routes, sold it at outrageous prices, and warned customers that too much leads to laughter, then trembling, then death. You file that under good to know. The fringe tidbit here. One apothecary in Bologna allegedly invented a perfume so potent it caused waking dreams. Worn only by royalty, and only on days when they wanted to forget what being royal actually meant, and it wasn't just herbs and powders. Apothecaries made pills by rolling ingredients with honey or lard. Created syrups that blurred pain and pleasure, and brewed cordials that blurred reality. You can still taste the after effects of the valerian blend. Your thoughts are soft-edged. Your limbs, cotton. The fire in the brazier now speaks to you in French. You don't speak French. The apothecary is unmoved, this man has heard worse. He once had a nun burst into song after mismeasuring her clove tonic. Another time, a knight insisted he saw a dragon in the rafters. You were drunk, the apothecary said. You gave me the wine. The knight replied. And you paid for it, said the apothecary, ending the debate. You ask if what you drank was legal, he shrugs. No one's banned dreams. Yet. You begin to understand that this shop, dim, cluttered, and probably breaking 10 ecclesiastical rules, is a kind of medieval pharmacy meets laboratory meets confessional booth. People come in sick. Some leave well. Some leave weeping. Some float home convinced they've spoken to saints. Even today, scholars debate whether apothecaries genuinely believed in the spiritual dimensions of their work, or simply sold what people were desperate to buy. After all, the church technically forbade sorcery. But not syrup. And if the syrup just happened to bring you divine visions? Well, no one's writing papal bulls over one honest hallucination. You get up to leave. Your legs are unsure. The doorframe looks taller than before. The apothecary hands you a small pouch of mint to bring you down, and a bit of charcoal for your stomach. He says it like a threat and a kindness. Outside, the street is still muddy. The air smells like dung. But your senses are humming, your breath silky, and the sky overhead seems bluer than it has any right to be. A flock of pigeons wheels overhead, and for a moment, they look like angels, then they poop on someone's cart, and you remember where you are. As you walk away, you hear the apothecary call out one last thing, next time. Try the lozenges. The red ones make you sing. You don't know whether to laugh or run, but you do know this. In a world without anesthesia, antidepressants, or sleep meds, the apothecary's cabinet was a portal, and sometimes a trapdoor, and you've only just scratched the surface. You round the corner of the street, but curiosity tugs you back like a tug on your cloak. You pause, then do what no rational, chemically altered medieval traveler should do. You return. Not for more. Just to look. Maybe, the apothecary hasn't noticed your return yet. He's pouring a thick amber liquid into tiny ceramic bottles, muttering something under his breath, possibly Latin, possibly sarcasm. On the shelf behind him, an unlabeled jar glowing faintly green under the lantern light. You point at it, he sees your finger. Not for you, he says without turning. What is it? A mistake. He doesn't elaborate. You don't press. That's rule number 1 in places like this. Don't ask about the glowing stuff unless you want to glow. 2. Instead, he gestures toward a heavy book chained to the wall. You step closer. It's a handwritten herbal compendium, thick with annotations and spills. Some margins are scribbled with drawings, plants, bones, something that might be a goat wearing a crown. One page catches your eye. A diagram showing how to layer poppy syrup with cinnamon and vinegar to quiet a widow's trembling. The line underneath it simply says, "Do not exceed 1 spoon." You ask, what happens if you do? He says, either she sees God, or she forgets she's a widow. And now you understand, this isn't about escape. Not entirely. It's about silence. Softening pain. Stretching time. Offering comfort in a world where your local options are disease, invasion, famine, or a really enthusiastic priest. Apothecaries were not just dealers in drugs. They were dealers in pause buttons. A peasant might come in with a cough and leave with a syrup that helps her breathe. A grieving parent might leave with something that makes the nights bearable, even if the mornings are fuzzy. And for the nobles, those privileged few, they might get a custom tonic brewed not for sleep, but for forgetting. Some fringe accounts, like one found in the diary of a disgraced Venetian clerk, describe a nobleman who requested a lucid syrup that would allow him to dream of his dead brother as if alive. He claimed it worked. He returned weekly for more. Eventually, he stopped coming. Some said he died. Others whispered he just chose to stay in the dreams, You wonder if that's what's happening to you now, if this gentle, tingling haze wrapping around your spine is a choice you didn't know you made. You stand again. Properly this time. You nod at the apothecary, who's now humming and crushing dried clove with a mortar shaped like a lion's head. He gives a final warning, not a threat, just a fact. If you feel like your feet aren't touching the ground tomorrow, he says, eat something heavy. Bread helps. Guilt works faster. You leave with your dignity mostly intact and your soul only slightly rearranged. Behind you, the bell above the door tinkles again. Someone else has come seeking peace, or at least, a brief and blurry version of it. You're walking. Again. Still. Maybe forever. Your feet are wrapped in rough cloth, your sandals worn down to the thickness of communion wafers. Dust clings to every fold of your robe. The sun doesn't scorch, it hovers, steady and judgmental, like an archbishop. You've lost count of the days. Maybe 20. Maybe 30. All you know is that you're somewhere between Bruges and Rome and your bones have stopped caring about geography. You are a pilgrim, which, in medieval terms, means you're voluntarily enduring what most people would call a long, uncomfortable hike sprinkled with religious guilt and very little protein. The goal is sacred, to reach a shrine, a relic, a holy site. Maybe Santiago de Compostela. Maybe the tomb of Saint Catherine. Maybe a rock that someone once cried on and claimed to feel forgiven. But here's the not-so-sacred truth. The road is long, your knees hurt, and you are absolutely, utterly done. Enter the poppy trail. No, not an official road. Not even a place on the map. It's more like a series of whispers traded between pilgrims who've walked farther than they meant to and learned how to ease the journey. You hear the first one at a crowded hostel outside Bologna. A man with cracked lips and blistered hands offers you a pouch of dried poppy petals. Just a pinch in wine, he says. Takes the edge off the prayers. You pretend to hesitate. But that night, under the leaking roof of a barn crammed with coffers and sleep kickers, you slip the powder into your mug and wait, and you float, your muscles forget their aching. Your mind releases its tally of sins. The snores around you begin to sound like lullabies. You drift so far into the dark that morning arrives with a slap of bread across your shoulder and someone yelling matins. You are reborn. Temporarily, this is the rhythm now. Wake. Walk. Ache. Pop float. Poppies weren't just for sleep. Medieval folk knew they soothed pain, physical and spiritual. Recipes for poppy syrup appear in herbals across Europe. Sometimes they're soaked in vinegar. Sometimes in honeyed wine. Always with vague warnings like not for children and do not exceed the Lord's mercy. And yet pilgrims took them. Quietly. Desperately, historians still argue whether the use of poppy among medieval pilgrims was ritual, medicinal, or recreational. Did they see it as a blessing from God, a mercy leaf? Or was it simply a hack to survive walking 600 miles on barley porridge and wet shoes? Some say it was an act of faith to endure pain. Others say the real faith was believing you could endure it without help. You meet a woman near the Apennines who carries a small wooden cross and a satchel full of poppy tea sachets. She tells you she's seen the Virgin 3 times. You ask if it was before or after the tea. She says during. You don't push the subject. Along the way, you trade stories and substances with other wanderers. Someone passes you a chunk of resin soaked in honey and says it's for divine dreams. Someone else has candied rose petals laced with mandrake root. They swear it helps you talk to saints. You don't question them. Mostly because you've started seeing faint halos around candle flames, and you haven't lit a candle in days. In one roadside chapel in Provence, you collapse during Vespers. A kindly nun gives you a brew of warm goat's milk, crushed poppy seeds, and a drop of wormwood. She says it's for spiritual alignment. You thank her. Hours later, you're staring at the ceiling, convinced you can hear the stained glass angels discussing your sins. They don't seem impressed. Some fringe documents from the 13th century describe pilgrims' wine made with opium and clove, served at way stations for travelers deemed too restless to sleep or too anxious to continue. It wasn't standard practice, at least not openly, but in the margin of one abbey's guest book, a monk scrawled, "Brother Elias walks better when he forgets he has feet." You know exactly what he means. Your pace quickens on days when you have a dose. It slows when you ration. Some pilgrims claim it shortens the journey, not in miles, but in misery. One man insists that the more you dream, the less you sin. Another swears that the more you float, the more angels you see. Both are limping. Neither seems particularly holy, but you're no better. Last week you wept during a sermon given by a shepherd with one eye and no Latin. You're still not sure what he said. But the poppy syrup you sipped beforehand convinced you it was divine. A popular myth you hear over and over is that Saint Christopher walked the Holy Land with poppy oil on his feet to prevent blisters. It's almost certainly false. But by the time you're halfway to Rome, you've tried it anyway. It doesn't stop the blisters, but it does make them less offensive to your soul. At one muddy campsite near Florence, you meet a former priest turned herbalist who sells tiny wax vials filled with something he calls the sleep of Saint Joseph. He claims it contains poppy, valerian, and a hint of paradise. You try one. You dream of flying fish, a chorus of donkeys, and your childhood home covered in snow. You wake up crying. You're not sure why. There's a moment, maybe in Umbria, when you sit under an olive tree, exhausted, hungry, and entirely unsure if you're still on a holy path or just walking in circles for the sake of feeling penitent. You fish into your bag and find your last sachet. Crushed petals. Still potent, you consider saving it, but the hills ahead look steep. The birds are too loud. And your soul feels frayed at the corners, so you brew it. It tastes like the color red smells, and then you walk, not lighter. Not faster. But softer. You notice the wind again. The way it moves through the cypress trees. You start humming, not a hymn, just a melody you can't name. That night you sleep beside a stream and dream of nothing, not visions. Not sins. Just silence, when you finally reach Rome. The city glows with relics and noise. Pilgrims crowd the basilicas. Priests chant over incense clouds. Somewhere, a cardinal sneezes into his jeweled sleeve. You fall to your knees before a cracked marble statue. You try to feel something. Gratitude. Awe. Completion, but all you feel is tired. A man beside you presses a small packet into your hand. Pilgrim's reward, he says with a wink. You don't ask what's inside. You already know. You pocket it, because maybe, after confession, after prayer, after standing in line to touch the bones of a saint, you'll want to float. Just once more, just to remember what it felt like to forget. You stay in Rome for 3 days, the churches blur together, domes. Relics, marble so cold it aches to kneel on. You press your forehead to ancient stone, trying to feel the holiness seep in. But part of you keeps drifting. Maybe it's the exhaustion. Maybe it's the poppies. Maybe it's that strange middle place where devotion and desire touch fingertips. On the second night, you find a small tavern off a crooked lane. A nun sits at the corner table, sipping something dark. She doesn't speak. But she slides you a cup. You drink. It tastes like fennel and firewood. And suddenly, you're back on the road, dusty and open, with the sky stretched wide like a canvas. You smile. She does not. By morning, the city feels louder. Heavier. Less like a reward and more like a performance. You visit one final shrine and drop the pouch into the alms box, unopened. Not because you don't want it, but because you're starting to remember what it feels like to carry your body without numbing it. You walk back into the world with sore feet and a clear mind, mostly, a little part of you still hums, and once in a while, when the sun hits just right, you float. It starts with music. Not the celestial kind, no harps, no choirs, no virgins floating on clouds. Just a scratchy fiddle, some clapping, and a drum that sounds like someone slapping a goat carcass. You're in a medieval tavern now. Probably somewhere in England. Or France. Maybe the border, depending on how drunk the cartographer was. You're not entirely sure because your head is already pleasantly fuzzy from the first 2 mugs of whatever they claimed was ale and might have also been sheep shampoo. The tavern's roof is thatched, its floor is dirt, and the patrons are approximately 1/3 farmers, 1/3 mercenaries, and 1/3 people who shouldn't legally be near open flame. You're squeezed between a sweating blacksmith and a bard who smells like he's lived in his lute for 3 days. It's loud, it's warm, and it's dangerous, not in the sword-fighting way, but in the way that someone, somewhere in the room, is about to have a terrible idea. You can feel it coming. Like thunder. Or plague. Then it happens. A man leaps onto the central table, tripping over a roasting pig in the process, and announces a competition. His words are slurred, but the gist is clear. Whoever consumes the strangest thing in the tavern wins free drinks for the rest of the night. The blacksmith beside you grunts. The bard perks up. And someone behind you already has a toad in his hand. You don't know where it came from. Or why he has it. But he's grinning. And so, of course, the chant begins, Toad. 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 You look around for a responsible adult. There isn't one. This is medieval nightlife, baby. Here's what you need to understand. In taverns, reality is soft clay. By the 3rd mug of strong ale, or 2nd if you skip dinner, anything becomes possible. And licking a toad? That's just Tuesday. Now, historians are divided. Some insist the whole toad-licking thing was more modern folklore, a 20th century urban myth twisted backward into history. But there are medieval references to toadstones, supposedly found in a living toad's head, and said to protect against poison. Apothecaries sometimes carried them, and superstitious nobles wore them as rings. Somewhere along the line, the idea morphed from magic talisman to psychoactive amphibian, and the weirdest part. Some toads do secrete substances that can induce altered states, not safely. Not wisely. But technically, so here you are, in a crowded, smoke-choked tavern, watching a man rub a toad on his tongue like it's a medieval popsicle. He shudders. Blinks. Then sits down very, very slowly. 10 minutes later, he's staring at the fireplace like it contains the secrets of the cosmos. Someone claps. Someone else faints. A woman near the bar starts singing a hymn in Latin. Backwards, the ale flows. It's worth noting that taverns weren't just drinking holes. They were social centers, makeshift inns, illegal gambling dens, and, occasionally, chemical playgrounds. People brought what they had. What they could brew. What their cousins swore tasted bad but made you see colors. You're offered a clay mug of something called Dragon's Whistle. It smells like burnt raisins and regret. You drink it anyway. Bad idea. Your tongue tingles. Your ears buzz. The bard beside you now seems profound. He's telling a story about a dancing goat who knew all the saints' names, and you are absolutely invested. You lean in. You nod. You may be crying. You're not sure. This is the danger of medieval taverns. The line between drink and drug is thinner than a monk's patience. Most brews weren't standardized. There were no labels. No ABV percentages. A mug of ale might be fermented grain and water. Or it might be a witch's side project. One French theory claims some taverns near the Black Forest added a pinch of fly agaric mushroom, a red-capped, white-spotted fungus with hallucinogenic properties, into their stronger batches. Why? Because it made the regulars talkative, thirsty, and too distracted to notice when their coin purses vanished. it's not just alcohol either. There's mead brewed with henbane, cider mixed with datura root, and wine steeped with deadly nightshade, just enough to make the walls pulse, but not enough to kill a paying customer. You try to stand up. The floor feels like bread dough. You sit back down. Someone across the room is laughing too hard at something that wasn't funny. You glance over. He's holding a turnip and talking to it like a long-lost uncle. You begin to understand the appeal. Later, in the back corner of the tavern, a grizzled man tells you about the green cup, a secret menu item served only to those who ask for it and pass a questionable riddle. He won't tell you what's in it. But he will show you the scar it gave him. You decide to pass. By now, the toad guy has gone quiet. He's curled under the table, muttering something about flying ships and holy fire. No one helps him. Someone tosses him a cloak. That's enough. You stumble outside for air. The night is sharp and dark. The stars blink like judgmental gods. Your head spins, but not from movement, just from sheer weirdness. A pig trots by. No leash. No owner. It looks at you with the calm indifference of something that's seen too much. You sit against the tavern wall, hoping the fresh air will clear your thoughts. It doesn't. Instead, you remember the poem the bard recited, something about the moon being a coin in a beggar's cup. It hits you right in the soul. You vow to write it down. You don't have paper. Or ink. Or literacy. Eventually, someone drags you back inside. The party has shifted from chaotic merriment to ritualistic shouting. Someone is insisting he's St. George. Someone else is pretending to be the dragon. You watch them duel with spoons. The tavern keeper doesn't intervene. He's too busy filling a jug with something that glows faintly blue. This, you think, is probably fine. Historians still argue about the actual substances served in medieval taverns. Some claim the highs were purely alcohol-induced. Others believe herbal brews and mushroom infusions were more common than documented. After all, medieval folk didn't have our distinctions between drugs and drinks. If it was wet, and you could sip it without dying immediately, it went in the mug. You finally collapse on a bench near the hearth. The fire crackles like laughter. Someone has drawn a face on the logs. It smiles at you. You smile back, your last coherent thought of the night. I hope that toad's okay. You sleep deeply. Weirdly. One long dream involving floating chalices, singing goats, and your childhood memories rearranged like playing cards. When you wake up, the tavern is quiet. The air is stale. Your tongue is made of dust. The bard is gone. So is the toad. You stumble outside again. It's morning. The world is too bright. The pigs are still wandering. You check your pouch. Still have your coins. Barely, you survived, but only barely. Later, when recounting this evening to someone, probably a monk, you'll claim the toad was a metaphor. The drink was medicinal. The singing goat was an allegory, but you'll know the truth, and so will your liver. As you stagger down the dirt lane away from the tavern, still blinking away the kaleidoscope echoes of the night, a boy passes you with a bucket. You glance in. There's a fish inside. Just one. It looks at you, solemnly. You nod. It nods back. You decide never to drink dragon's whistle again, but your legs, traitorous things, guide you back toward the tavern the next night. Not because you want more of whatever happened, but because you need answers. Closure. Or at least, confirmation that someone else remembers the goat duel. The tavern looks the same. The roof hasn't burned down. The door still creaks like it's dying. Inside, the regulars are in place, as if they never left. The blacksmith grunts. The bard's back, cleaner this time, thank God. The woman who sang Latin backward is now playing dice with a man dressed entirely in feathers. You ask cautiously, did anything strange happen last night? The blacksmith nods. You sang to a potato. Ah, the bard chimes in, you made it cry. Ah, he claps your shoulder and smiles. You weren't the weirdest one. Relief floods you. Still, you ask if there's anything without mystery ingredients tonight. The barkeep hands you a mug. Just ale. Probably. You sip. It's bitter. Warm. And blissfully boring, but in the corner of your eye, you see a new face, a woman pouring something green into a goblet. It glows faintly. No one else seems to notice. She meets your gaze. Winks. Then drinks, and suddenly you wonder if the weirdness isn't in the drinks at all. Maybe it's just the kind of people who keep coming back. Maybe it's you now. You clutch your mug, sip slower, and don't look at the toad on the windowsill. You've strayed too far from the village. The path behind you is narrow, eaten by ivy. The moon is somewhere behind a ceiling of fog, and every branch overhead creaks like an opinion. You're not sure what led you here, curiosity, a dare, or maybe just the bad decision to follow the woman with the basket and no visible footsteps. You're in the woods now. Deep woods. Which woods? And it's quiet in a way that's not natural. Like the air itself is holding its breath, a flutter overhead, a bat. Or something worse. You flinch. Then you hear it, a rustle of cloth, a whisper, a crackle of something thick being stirred in something older than a cauldron. You move closer. You shouldn't. But you do, because you've heard the rumors, haven't you? The ones passed in whispers between drunks and monks alike. That deep in the woods, under moonlight and oak, women meet. Not to gossip. Not to pray. But to fly, witchcraft, they called it, flying ointment, specifically. The recipe varies depending on the region and the century, but the idea is the same, a salve or balm, thick with herbs, fat, and other things, applied to the skin, or more delicate areas, with the goal of leaving the body behind. Not metaphorically. Literally, you finally see her. A woman with hair like a bird's nest and eyes that reflect the fire. She stirs a pot that smells like myrrh and mushrooms. And something that makes your nose tingle and your toes twitch. She doesn't look up. She just says, "You're late." You want to speak. You don't. She dips her fingers into the dark paste, rubs it along her arms, her temples, behind her knees. She holds the jar out to you. This is how it begins. Here's the thing, historians still argue whether flying ointments were real, metaphorical, or just ecclesiastical propaganda. The church certainly believed they were real. Inquisition records are filled with testimonies, some voluntary, most not, of women confessing to smearing themselves with salves and soaring through the night sky on animals, broomsticks, or storms. Were they hallucinating? Dreaming? Or actually flying? You dip 2 fingers into the salve, it's cold. It tingles. It smells like soil and sorrow and the kind of herb you'd find growing from a forgotten grave. You smear it on your wrist, nothing happens, then everything does, your chest tightens. Your vision narrows. Your body melts, not painfully, but like wax exposed to flame. You are no longer standing, but you are also not falling. You are rising, the woods fall away beneath you, the trees shrink, then vanish, the stars grow teeth and laugh, and you laugh, too. You don't know if your body is still in the clearing. Or if the old woman is watching you float like a leaf caught in God's exhale. But you're free. For now, and then the dreams begin, not dreams, really. Memories stolen from other people's lives. You walk through palaces you've never visited. You cry at funerals that haven't happened yet. You speak languages you never learned. You see her again, the witch, but now she has your face. You wake in the dirt, your hands are sticky. Your mouth tastes like ash. And beside you, feathers. Black. Soft. Still warm, there's no fire now. No woman. Just you and the trees. And a smear of dark balm on your ankle. You sit up slowly. This isn't a hangover. This is something else. The idea of flying ointments wasn't new even in the Middle Ages. Some say the recipe goes back to ancient Greece, when priestesses used hallucinogenic herbs to commune with the divine. In medieval Europe, the most infamous blends included deadly nightshade, atropa belladonna, henbane, mandrake, and datura. All powerful tropane alkaloids, if you want the modern science. All absolutely unholy, if you asked a bishop, but the witches. They knew. Some used animal fat as a base. Others used oil or wax. Some claimed the ointment had to be stirred with a human bone. One fringe tale describes a cauldron that had to be heated with the breath of a dying sinner. Creepy. Yes. Practical? Probably not. But then again, practical people don't fly. You stagger back toward civilization, or, at least, the smell of something baked and less mystical. The first human you see, an old farmer with one eye and too many teeth, nods at you like he's seen this before. You been in the woods? He asks, you nod, he spits into the dirt. You'll want bread. Maybe milk. Don't talk to mirrors for a few days. You don't ask why. Later, in the village, you ask a midwife if she's heard of flying ointments. She scoffs. Says they're devil's grease. Then, after a pause, she adds, but I knew a woman once who swore by foxglove and rendered goat fat. Said she floated clean over the river one Beltane night. You thank her. She presses a sachet of dried thyme into your hand. For clarity, she says, you smell it. You believe her. It takes a few nights before you stop dreaming of wind rushing under your ribs, before you stop seeing sparks in the corners of your eyes, before fire smells safe again, but part of you, just a sliver, wonders if it was all in your head, or if your soul briefly forgot the rules of gravity, because even now, under clean sheets and beside a hearth that crackles without menace, your fingers sometimes twitch. Like they remember holding sky, and your skin. It still hums, just a little, like it misses the bomb. The next night, you don't sleep. Not because you can't, but because you're afraid to. You lie awake on a lumpy straw mattress in the loft of a baker's cousin's shed, staring at the beams overhead, wondering if they too once watched someone fly and come back strange. The stars are hidden again, tucked behind cloud like a secret. You shift. Every creak in the wood beneath you feels like it might be the start of something, another lift, another ripple of disobedient gravity, but it never comes. The balm is gone. Scrubbed away with vinegar and well water. You even tried sage smoke, just in case. The local priest was right and your experience had less to do with herbs and more to do with spiritual freeloaders hitching a ride in your blood, but nothing happens. And in that nothing, you feel flat. Tethered. Unmagical. You remember the old woman's eyes. Calm, but utterly detached. As though she'd long ago accepted that the world was not meant to make sense. And she was simply here to stir the pot. The villagers are different now, too. They look at you like they almost recognize something. Or maybe they don't want to. You overhear one mutter a charm under her breath as you pass, fingers curled protectively around a crucifix. Another leaves a dish of salt by your doorstep. A child offers you a dandelion, and his mother snatches him away before you can say thank you. It's not malice. It's survival. People don't hate witches. They fear being near one when something goes wrong. You don't blame them, because even you don't know what happened. You visit the local priest out of curiosity more than guilt. He's young. Nervous. Probably a second son shuffled into the cloth before he got someone pregnant. He listens to your vague confession without blinking. But when you mention ointments, herbs, and dreams of flight, his fingers tighten on the edges of his chair. These are the tools of the deceiver, he says carefully, but what if they open something true? He swallows. Doesn't answer, Instead, he hands you a candle. Beeswax. Unlit. Light it when you doubt, he says. If the flame flickers, pray. If it stays steady, sleep, you take it. It flickers every night, and you stop sleeping altogether. In the countryside, stories grow like weeds. Every town has a tale of the woman who flew, the boy who saw the devil in a mushroom, or the farmhand who floated 3 feet off the ground after kissing a girl who smelled of lavender and wet earth. They're not written down. Not really. But if you listen in markets, in kitchens, in fields after sundown, you start to piece it together. There was a network of women. Not a coven. Not witches in the cartoonish sense. Just knowers. Women who understood roots and rhythms. Who knew that mandrake screams only if you believe it will. That henbane must be picked with your mouth closed. That dreams are more likely to arrive if you smear balm on your soles instead of your brow, and yes, some of them flew, not every time. Not in the same way. Some said it felt like becoming smoke. Others said they turned into birds, foxes, beams of light. One claimed she rode the moon like a cradle. Another said she never flew but felt as if she had lived 5 other lives all at once, none of them hers, all of them true. There's a debate in scholarly circles now, whether these visions were actual out-of-body experiences. Chemically induced hallucinations, or deeply encoded metaphors for spiritual liberation. One theory suggests these rituals were communal, tied to ancient rites, possibly even connected to pre-Christian goddess worship. Another theory says, no, they were just women trying to numb childbirth and forget their husbands, but walk long enough, listen quietly enough, and you start to realize something. They weren't escaping, they were searching, for knowledge. For ecstasy. For control in a world that gave them none, and here you are, balanced on that same edge, half believer, half fraud, not sure if you fell into their tradition or just tripped on someone else's dream. One night, you wake to laughter in the distance. Not village laughter. Not drunk peasant laughter. But high, clean laughter. Familiar. And impossibly close. You step outside, no one, only wind and owls, but the candle on your table is lit, and no one touched it. The next morning, you walk, not far. Just past the hedgerow. To the edge of the forest, you kneel and press your hands to the earth. It feels warm, forgiving, and the barest scent of myrrh curls up from the moss. It doesn't matter whether it was real, you think. What matters is how real it felt, and the truth you found in it, because even if you never fly again, even if the bomb was just sap and imagination, you've seen something now, something wide. And wild. And yours, and for the first time in days, you sleep, not because the candle stays steady, but because you've finally stopped asking whether you dreamed, or were dreamed, and when do you sleep, you fly, no herbs. No ointment, just you, and the wind remembering your name. It's late. Too late. But the abbey lights still glow, not candles. Not torches. But lanterns fueled by oil, hanging in long rows like patient stars indoors. You're in a monastery now, not visiting, not exactly welcomed, but tolerated. Like a strange shadow that wandered in through the cloister gates and refused to leave politely. The monks don't say much. They're not rude. They're just busy. Prayers at dawn, psalms at noon, copying texts between, with barely enough time to exhale. But they see you. They nod. One even offered you weak beer yesterday. That's practically intimacy here. You didn't come for religion. Not really. You came because someone said the monks knew things, herbs, potions, remedies for the mind, whispered under their breath like it wasn't printed in their own illuminated books. You're not the first to ask either. Travelers come. Some sick. Some curious. Some clearly fleeing something invisible. Clawing behind their ribs. Monks don't judge. Or if they do it silently and in Latin. There's a scent here. Always. It follows you through corridors, through the scriptoria and the apothecary garden, something between lavender, old paper, and boiled root. It's not unpleasant. Just steady. Like background music for the soul, you sit on a bench under the ivy-laced wall. The brother with the cloudy eye approaches. You seek quiet, he says, not a question. You nod. He offers a small leather pouch. Inside, something crumbled, grayish-green, and vaguely sweet. Monk tea. The real kind. The kind not mentioned in sermons but passed down like psalms that were too honest to print. Steep gently, he says. And stay near stone. You don't ask what that means. That night, you do exactly as told. The tea tastes like licorice and moss. The warmth spreads slowly. And then, you are still. Not floating. Not buzzing. But simply. Untouched, the abbey's world continues, chanting, scribing, candlelight flickering in rhythm with breath. But inside your skin, there is no urgency. No ache. No fear. Just presence, and that, here, is the real miracle. See, monks weren't just keepers of scripture, they were quiet alchemists. Between their prayers, they tended vast herb gardens. Distilled medicines, catalogued plant properties with a rigor that would shame some modern researchers. They knew what calmed, what stirred, what whispered to the nerves like a lullaby sung through soil. Historians often focus on their libraries. But the true magic? It was brewed in clay pots and taken in sips. You overhear one monk instructing a novice, mugwort for the visions. Chamomile for the anger. Hellebore, for forgetting. Forgetting what? He doesn't explain. Some claim the monks used their knowledge strictly for healing. Others argue there were rituals, private vigils where mixtures were taken before meditating for hours. Occasionally days. Eyes rolled back, breath slowed. Waiting for what they called the interior light. You witness one such vigil. An older monk sits cross-legged in the garden just before dawn. Steam from a cup curls around him like incense. His lips move, but no sound escapes. When the sun rises, his face breaks into a smile so full, so inexplicably clear, that you feel briefly ashamed for never having believed in anything that completely. You want that, but you're not ready. Not yet, so you wander. The herbarium is dense with scent. Sage. Rosemary. Lemon balm. And something bitter that curls your tongue. You lean close to a labeled jar, valerian. Rooty. Earthy. You take a sniff. Too long, now you're dizzy. Someone catches your arm. A monk. Younger. Smiling. That one likes to dance with the head, he says. Only use it when your thoughts grow teeth. He leads you to a bench. Offers water. And a flat, oat-crusted biscuit. You nibble. You breathe, it passes. The monks don't laugh. They don't scold. This is normal here. The garden isn't a danger, it's a landscape to navigate, one herb at a time. That evening, the brother with the cloudy eye visits again. You're not here for God, he says. But you're still welcome. You apologize, he waves it off. We serve silence. God just borrows it. Then he asks if you want to see the oldest book in the abbey. Of course you say yes. It's locked behind iron bars. Bound in leather so dark it's almost blue. No title. Just a brass clasp. He opens it carefully. Inside, drawings. Herbs. Notes in ink so faded it might have been breathed instead of written. You point at one, he nods. St. Cuthbert's tonic. Used before long fasts. Helped quiet the hunger and open the mind. You ask if it worked, he shrugs. We still have the recipe. He flips to another, a diagram of a human body, with red lines drawn from temple to foot. Next to it, An herbal list. Mugwort. Vervain. Bittersweet. Some erased name replaced with, some say it was for traveling without walking, he whispers. Spirit journeys. You try to joke, so monks got high. But he doesn't smile, we were never high. We were low. Rooted. Still. That's what the herbs gave us. That night, you try the tonic, the spoonful only. The bitterness is fierce. Your mouth floods with metal and mint. You lie down on your straw mat and wait, nothing happens, and then everything quiets, not like sleep. Not like death. Like being folded gently into something bigger than you, you dream. Or maybe you don't, but when you open your eyes, the morning is already singing, the garden seems brighter, the monks nod as you pass, you're not one of them. But you've joined something now. A rhythm. A quiet. A knowing, and the strange thing, you don't need the herbs anymore, not every day, because the silence stayed, just a little, in your chest, in your hands, in your breath, and maybe, just maybe, in your prayers, even if you never meant them to be. Before you leave the monastery, one of the older monks presses a small bundle into your hand. Wrapped in linen. Tied with reed string. Not for sickness, he says. Not even for sleep. Just for remembering. You unwrap it later, beneath a beech tree on the hill overlooking the abbey. Inside, a handful of dried lemon balm, 3 lavender sprigs, and a pressed violet tucked between parchment. On it, written in looping Latin, Memoni ergo sum, I remember, therefore I am, you breathe it in. Floral. Dusty. Alive, in the distance, the bells ring for none. The monks chant. You can't hear the words, but the sound folds into the breeze like linen folds into skin, and just for a moment, with no tea, no tincture, no ritual, just sky above and herbs in hand, you feel the silence settle in your chest again. Not as absence, but as presence. You don't fly, you don't float, you just are, and for once, that is enough. You walk back down the hill slowly, not away, but forward, still humming, still holding that tiny pressed violet like a memory someone entrusted you with. You step into the crowded marketplace just as dawn bleeds pink across the sky, and the stalls begin to come alive with the clatter of merchants unpacking their wares. The air is thick with scents, fresh bread, spilled wine, livestock sweat, and something herbal, faint but unmistakable. Somewhere in this cacophony, the promise of another kind of escape hides, one brewed not from poppies or mysterious ointments, but from smoke rising in lazy spirals above cracked clay pipes. You find yourself drawn to a narrow alley where a small shop stands behind a faded wooden sign emblazoned with a curious symbol, an unassuming green leaf intertwined with curling tendrils. Inside, the air is cool and heavy with an aroma you've never quite smelled before. The shopkeeper, a weathered man with a sly smile and eyes that twinkle with secret knowledge, greets you with a nod. What brings you here, traveler? He asks, voice low. You shrug, eyes scanning the shelves lined with jars filled with dried leaves, resins, and powders. One jar bears a label you can't read but recognize instantly, cannabis. He watches you carefully and, with a knowing chuckle, says, ah, the green herb. Not just for healing aches and pains. It has other gifts. In medieval Europe, cannabis was known but rarely spoken of openly, often relegated to the margins of herbal compendiums. Used mainly for its fibers and medicinal qualities, anesthetic, anti-inflammatory, but whispers in certain circles hinted at its psychoactive properties. Monks, apothecaries, and even some nobles kept small caches, though always under wraps, for fear of censure or worse. You watch as the shopkeeper expertly rolls a thin paper tube filled with the crushed leaves. He lights it, and a thin tendril of smoke curls towards the ceiling. He offers it to you, eyes steady. You inhale tentatively. The smoke is harsh but carries a sweet undertone, like pine and earth. A warmth spreads slowly through your chest, settling your muscles, and easing the sharp edges of your thoughts. Historians still argue about how widespread cannabis use was in medieval Europe. Some say it was confined to certain regions, perhaps the Mediterranean basin or the Slavic lands, while others argue it was far more common, simply unrecorded due to its association with illicit practices or folk rituals. There's also debate about whether it was primarily smoked, ingested, or applied topically, with evidence varying wildly. You sit back and feel the marketplace transform. The clamor softens, colors brighten. The bread smells richer, the chatter mellower. The blacksmith's hammer sounds like a heartbeat, the shopkeeper speaks again, softer this time. It was called hemp mostly. For rope, cloth. But some knew. They called it the plant of visions. You nod, thinking of the monk's teas and the witch's ointments, all ways to escape or expand the mind. Different methods, different cultures, but the same human yearning. As you pass the shop on your way out, a woman in a tattered cloak leans close and whispers, "Beware the green, traveler." It's a gentle friend but a tricky one. You smile, knowing full well that all your new friends, the poppies, the ointments, the monk's potions, had their shadows. Later, as twilight descends and the city's lanterns flicker alive, you find a quiet rooftop overlooking the rooftops and spires. You light the small pipe again, letting the smoke curl free into the cool air. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you are weightless. You're still on the rooftop, eyes half closed, the city stretched out like a breathing quilt below you. The smoke has softened your senses, not dulled them. Sound arrives in ripples, not waves. Distant church bells toll like they've been muffled by velvet. A child's laughter, carried by the breeze, seems to echo twice. You look up. The sky is richer somehow. Purple-black and embroidered with slow-moving stars. You're not sure whether they're really moving or a mercenary who brought seeds home from the east. It wasn't common knowledge, but it wasn't lost either. You recall the marketplace earlier today. That look in the shopkeeper's eye. Not mischievous. Not rebellious. Just knowing, as though he understood that the mind needs rest just as much as the body. That healing isn't always linear. That laughter and stillness are both forms of prayer. You rise from the rooftop, limbs light, and descend the narrow stairs back into the city. The world greets you differently now. Slower. Softer. As if everything's gone from shouting to humming. You pass a bakery. The scent of anise and burnt sugar stops you cold. You blink. Is it open? No. Just the residual heat escaping cracks in the wood. Still, it smells like memory. Further down the street, a lantern flickers. The man lighting them is humming an old tune. You hum along without meaning to. He doesn't seem surprised. Eventually, you reach a quiet courtyard with a well at its center. Ivy clings to the stones. A stray cat brushes your leg and vanishes. You sit. A woman, elderly, wrapped in wool, with silver-streaked hair, sits beside you without asking. She opens a pouch and begins packing a small pipe. Similar to yours. Older, she glances at you. First time. You nod. She lights the pipe with a sliver of charcoal. The smoke swirls upward like a ribbon seeking heaven. She takes a long breath, exhales, and says, "The church doesn't like it. They say it opens the wrong doors." You hesitate. And do you think they're wrong? She shrugs. It opens doors. What you do on the other side is your business. You like that answer. She hands you the pipe. You decline. Not because you're afraid, but because tonight, you don't need more. Tonight, you're already walking through the door. You sit together in silence. Then she speaks again. Used to be, people came to the herb for stories. Not escape. Not nonsense. But to remember the things they forgot they knew. You glance at her. She taps her temple. We carry too much noise. The green quiets it. Helps you listen again. She finishes her pipe and leaves with a quiet nod. As if she's given you a gift and trusts you'll unwrap it in your own time. Later, back in your rented room, you lie awake. Not with restlessness, but with awareness. You feel your breath move like wind in a corridor. Your thoughts are gentle visitors. None are in a rush. None shout. You realize, this was never about getting high. Not really. In this world, your world, those who sought altered states weren't chasing chaos, they were seeking clarity, understanding, moments of stillness in a noisy, dangerous life. The monk in the herb garden. The woman in the woods with her bomb. The shopkeeper. The Sufi spinning under desert moonlight. Even the weary peasants who smoked behind barns at the end of a day that took more than it gave, they weren't escaping. They were reclaiming agency. Peace. A moment to feel something other than hunger or fear, and so are you. Tomorrow, you'll walk again. New roads. New herbs. New stories, but tonight you lie on a straw-filled mattress beside a cracked window. The stars are visible again, you stare at them until they blink first, and you sleep, not from exhaustion, not from escape, but from enoughness. You sleep like someone who has finally remembered their name. You wake to rain. Not a storm. Not a drizzle. Just that soft, medieval kind of rain that drapes itself across rooftops like a sigh. It doesn't soak, it seeps. The kind that smells like moss and stone and things long buried. You pull on a cloak that doesn't belong to you. Someone left it at the foot of your bed, woolen, with a leaf-shaped clasp. The note beside it reads, "For the journey. North Road." You'll know when. You don't question it, because by now, you've learned, in this version of the world, answers are luxuries. But directions? Directions are sacred. You leave the little town with the pipe still tucked in your satchel, your mind still humming from the quiet of last night. The green has faded from your bloodstream, but its echo is kind. Like the scent of bread long after it's been eaten. You carry it. Gently, and soon, the countryside unfurls like a forgotten lullaby. Trees lean inward. Mist hangs low. You pass a stone with a carved spiral too symmetrical to be natural, and then, just beyond it, a hidden path curves from the main road, shadowed and uninviting. You know this is the one. It takes you into a forest older than memory, not just ancient in trees, but in feeling. The kind of place where plants speak if you're patient, and mushrooms grow in patterns that look like maps if you squint hard enough. It doesn't take long to find the first sign. A cluster of mushrooms arranged in a ring, glowing faintly beneath the canopy, pale caps with rust-colored spots, their stems thick and damp. You pause. Not because you're afraid, but because suddenly, you're not alone. A voice from behind. You see them too. You turn, a woman stands there, barefoot, her cloak damp with fog. Not old, but time-worn. The way oak bark is worn. You nod. She steps into the ring of mushrooms, kneels, and picks one with reverence. Amanita muscaria, she says. Fly agaric. The gateway fungus. You know the name. You've heard the rumors, red cap, white spots, the toadstool from fairy tales. Hallucinogenic. Dangerous. Divine, they say, she continues, that if you eat just enough, you'll speak to the trees. Eat a little more, and you'll hear your grandmother's voice even if she's been gone a decade. Eat too much, and you'll dance until your ribs crack. You raise an eyebrow, she smiles. So we don't eat too much. You follow her deeper into the woods, where the path winds past moss-covered stones and low-hanging branches. You pass more mushrooms, tiny orange ones that shimmer like embers, ghost-white clusters that seem to breathe in the dark, and one thick, black specimen that smells like burnt sugar and something metallic. She names each as you pass. Psilocybe. Claviceps. Pinealis. Cordyceps. Historians still argue whether our ancestors understood their true power, or simply stumbled into madness and called it magic. You reach a clearing where others wait, men and women, none of them speaking, all seated in a loose circle. Some wear crowns of woven twigs, others carry wooden bowls filled with a thick, murky brew. This isn't a party, it's a ritual, a journey, and now you're part of it, you're handed a bowl. The mixture inside smells of soil, vinegar, and something almost meaty. You hesitate, the barefoot woman nods. Your body will protest. That's expected. You drink, the taste is appalling. Like spoiled wine mixed with brine and pennies. But you don't stop. Because something deep in your gut tells you, this is the threshold. Minutes pass, then, suddenly, everything happens, your vision bends inward. Not outward, like with the pipe. This is different. More intimate. Like someone's folding your consciousness like cloth, the trees breathe. Literally. Their trunks expand and contract like lungs. The sky pulses like a heartbeat. And when you look at your hands, they are both ancient and newborn. Wrinkled and glowing, and then comes the sound, not music, not voices, a tone, low, endless, vibrating through your ribs, your teeth, your spine. You realize. It's not external. It's you. Or rather, you inside time. The barefoot woman's voice floats to you, far away, like it's drifting on wind filtered through water. This is not intoxication. It is invitation. And you walk through yourself, not your memories. Not your thoughts. But the spaces in between. You see the moment your great-grandfather almost drowned. You see a child you've never met laugh beneath a cherry tree. You see yourself, old and frail, feeding birds from a cracked bowl with yellow flowers, and then, darkness, not scary. Not even empty, just quiet, until you hear a whisper, we are mushrooms dreaming of humans. You laugh, or cry, or both, and then, nothing. You wake up in the same clearing, but the sun has shifted. Afternoon now. The others are already gone, save the barefoot woman. She hands you water. Did you see? She asks. You nod. You did. You saw something. Or maybe everything. Fly agaric and other entheogenic fungi were more than curiosities in the Middle Ages. In some northern cultures, especially among the Sami of Scandinavia, there are accounts of shamans ingesting these mushrooms during rituals. Some scholars argue the practice was linked to drumming, vision quests, and communication with the spirit world. The word shaman itself traces roots to Siberia, where psychoactive fungi were dried, then eaten, or, in stranger accounts, filtered through reindeer urine to reduce toxicity and sharpen the hallucinogenic effects. Yes. You heard that correctly. You remember a tale the barefoot woman shared last night. A whisper between moments. That in some tribes, the reindeer would eat the fly agaric, stumble around in bliss, then urinate, and the humans would collect and drink the urine to experience a purer, less toxic version of the mushroom's journey. Disgusting, sure, but apparently, highly effective, and that's the part most medieval histories leave out. This wasn't always indulgence. It was methodology. Tradition. A science of transcendence. Before science had vocabulary for it, back in the village, no one asks where you've been. But someone leaves dried mushrooms on your windowsill, small, blue-tinted, wrapped in linen. A gift. A nod, you don't touch them. Not yet, because you're still carrying the dream. The whisper. The trees that breathed. The mushrooms that told secrets through color and taste and rhythm. You walk to the river, it gurgles like it's laughing, and as you watch the current pull leaves downstream, you hear it again, faint, like an echo bouncing off your bones. We are mushrooms dreaming of humans. And for once, you believe it. You sit by the river until your fingers go numb from stillness. The mushrooms have long left your system, but they haven't truly left you. There's a difference between sobering and unseeing. And you? You still see, not visions. Not hallucinations. But the layer beneath things, the shimmer of intention in a leaf's curl, the precise rhythm with which a bird lands on a branch. You swear the air has a texture now. A kind of warp to its weave, like a tapestry just barely brushed out of place, and you remember what the barefoot woman said as she placed your cloak around your shoulders this morning: integration is the real magic. Integration. A word that didn't exist in medieval tongues but lived in the way people stitched experiences into folklore. Into prayers, into lullabies. You think of peasants who chewed dried caps on feast days, then spoke to angels through cracked teeth. Of wandering mystics who brewed teas they dared not name. Of scribes who copied psalms with ink-stained hands while their minds still echoed with fungal thunder. This wasn't escapism, it was communion. Even now, sitting here under a tree with no name, you feel it, that thread through time, woven with spore and soil, linking you not just to visionaries or shamans or fringe monks, but to every terrified, curious human who ever asked the world to speak back, and the world did, in light. In laughter. In mushrooms glowing faintly at the base of a birch tree, you press a hand to your chest and find your heartbeat waiting. Not frantic. Not slow. Just steady, like a drum, like a rhythm, like an invitation. You smile, and the river smiles back. It starts with a fruit plate, not a battle. Not a sermon. Not a vision from heaven, just a plate of dates, neatly arranged and glossed with honey, presented at a council breakfast by a servant too well-groomed and far too silent. You're present only because your latest role, unofficial but vital, is scribed to the uneasy. That is, you're good at keeping minutes during meetings where no one trusts anyone else, and where every word might be a dagger in silk. The breakfast is held in the inner courtyard of a noble's estate, a Roman-style affair, with mosaic tiles and a fountain shaped like a lion vomiting into a basin. Around you, aristocrats and clergy pick at cheese, whisper over flatbread, and pretend their hands aren't already stained with other people's ambition. You take your seat at the back, unimportant enough to be ignored but vital enough to hear everything, and the dates. They're the real reason half the men here are pretending to smile, because in this particular court, this melting pot of crusaders, poets, spies, and hypocrites, dates mean something. They don't grow nearby. They're imported, expensive, and rare enough to be wrapped in layers of rumor. The local legend says they're laced with opium to calm the noble guests. That or saffron stolen from rival monasteries. No one knows for sure. But everyone eats them, you don't. Not yet. Across the table, a bishop with wine-thick breath is murmuring to a knight who used to serve a rival king. Behind him, two eunuchs watch the conversation like falcons wearing robes, and just behind them, you notice a man with a ring on each finger, and no eyebrows. That's how you know he's a poisoner, not alleged. Not whispered, known. His presence at the breakfast isn't an accident. He's not a guest. He's not a servant. He's bait, or insurance. Or both. The man with the rings eats one date, slowly, like it's a ceremony. Everyone notices. No one mentions it. You scribble that down in your notes, because in this court, information is currency, and memory is a form of survival. The first real hint that something's off comes when the abbot begins to sweat through his robes. Not just a little. Not just breakfast heat, dripping. He dabs his brow. Sips wine. Laughs at the wrong moment. The knight to his left offers him a cloth, then casually shifts his chair an inch away. The poisoner raises an eyebrow, not his own, of course, and sips from his goblet. You glance at the fruit plate, 2 dates missing now, still untouched by the king himself, who is fashionably late, or perhaps just waiting to see who dies first. Historians still argue whether drugs were regularly used in court diplomacy, or just in whispered assassination plots. Some accounts claim noble feasts were laced with aphrodisiacs, relaxants, or truth serums. Others suggest it was less about chemistry and more about perception. If someone believed the wine made them more open, it often did, but the problem is, perception was reality here. The abbot stumbles to his feet, mumbling something about needing air, no one stops him. Minutes later, a runner whispers in the steward's ear. The steward doesn't flinch, just lifts his cup and declares, to unexpected clarity. A few guests chuckle, you do not, because that toast was rehearsed, and because the abbot had been opposing a new grain tax proposed by the king's cousin. You scribble again, in a margin, you draw a date with tiny fangs. The meeting continues, they discuss trade routes, marriage alliances, the rising cost of horseshoes. Someone brings up the shortage of qualified scribes. You pretend not to exist, but behind the words, a new current is forming, something darker than diplomacy. By the time the king arrives, robes billowing, beard braided, flanked by musicians who don't dare play a note, the tone of the meeting has changed. Half the men are giddy. Half are scared, you can't tell who's which. The king sits. Eats a date. Smiles, just one, like it's a ritual, and perhaps it is. You learn later that the kitchen boy who arranged the fruit was sent away immediately after. Not dismissed. Disappeared. That's the first real clue. This isn't about opium, it's about leverage, because hidden among the feast's pleasures are substances not just meant to dull or heighten sensation, but to control memory. You think of herbs you've encountered before, henbane, datura, belladonna. Plants that don't just disorient, but scramble. That create gaps. Falsehoods. Dreams so vivid they replace real events. It's said in one 12th century manuscript, still debated, naturally, that a priest confessed to crimes he never committed, simply because his wine had been laced with something that filled his mind with fabricated guilt, and in this court, guilt is a coin, a weapon, a meal served cold and garnished with dates. You stay late that night, reviewing your notes. Your hand cramps from writing. You've tracked who looked at whom, who laughed too hard, who didn't eat. The next morning, 2 names are missing from the court ledger, the bishop and the steward. Both replaced without comment. You learn from a kitchen maid, half drunk and overly friendly, that both men had signed confessions before sunrise. You ask, confessions of what? She just giggles and says, whatever they were told they remembered. And that's when you realize, this isn't politics, it's performance, an opera of altered memory, choreographed by men with herbs in one hand and knives in the other. Later that week, you're summoned to a new breakfast, different fruit, same seating. No one mentions the bishop, no one mentions the steward, but the poisoner is there again, this time with a new ring, black, opaque. And the cup, he asks you to recite what you saw last week, who spoke, who hesitated, who declined the dates. You hesitate, then you give him your second version. His expression doesn't change, but as you rise to leave, he places a dried fig in your hand. You understand, this was your test, and a fig, not a reward, a warning, a new symbol you'll add to your secret notes tomorrow. Because in this palace of honeyed fruit and curated dreams, the only safe memory is one you never write down. You don't eat the figure, you place it gently inside your journal, between 2 pages inked with coded records of glances and gestures and the scent of specific wines. By morning, the fig has flattened, leaving a soft oil stain that looks almost like an eye. It watches you now, and you begin to wonder if memory itself has grown a mouth. At the next gathering, no one speaks above a murmur. The dates are gone, replaced by pale pears soaked in rosewater. But the performance continues. Nobles feign laughter, clerics quote half-remembered scripture, and everyone watches everyone else watching. The poisoner doesn't appear, but someone new does, a woman in yellow silk, wearing earrings shaped like laurel leaves and a brooch etched with a single poppy. She smiles at you. Not flirtation, recognition. As though she's read your secret ledger. As though she's been writing one too, and for the first time. You realize this isn't just survival, it's recruitment. You're not a scribe anymore, you're a historian of hallucination, a chronicler of curated truths, a witness to a world where forgetting is power, and remembering is the only rebellion. So you write, and you do not blink. The invitation arrives as a folded scrap of parchment tucked into your boot, no seal, no signature, just 4 words scrawled in wine-colored ink, tonight. Garden behind the stables. You don't ask how it got there. You've stopped asking how anything happens in this place. It's well after midnight when you slip through the back corridors of the manor. The air outside is thick with moisture and wood smoke, the kind of chill that settles under your fingernails. You pass the stables, empty now but still scented of hay and nervous horses, and push open the ivy-laced gate behind them. The garden is overgrown, but not unkempt. Every wild vine and leaning stalk seems deliberate, as though cultivated not for beauty or harvest, but intent. Even the weeds look rehearsed. She's waiting there, seated on a bench shaped like a curled serpent, the woman from the feast, yellow silk again, though tonight it glows in the moonlight like a lantern. Her poppy brooch catches the light. You kept the fig, she says without turning. You nod. Of course you did. She gestures for you to sit, and you do. Then she unrolls a bundle from her lap, velvet-lined, compartmentalized, filled with powders, dried leaves, vials of amber and rose. A miniature apothecary disguised as jewelry. These, she says, are not to escape. She picks up a vial, thin as a reed, and holds it to the moonlight, there for seeing. You take the vial. Uncork it. Inside, a clear, slightly syrupy liquid that smells like rosemary and something faintly metallic. You don't drink it. Not yet. She reaches over and does something no one's done to you in weeks, touches your wrist. You've been watching, she says softly. Now it's time to remember differently. The liquid tastes colder than it smells. You brace yourself for the spin, the nausea, the surreal unraveling that accompanied the monk's herbs and the mushroom tea in the woods, but none of that comes. Instead, the garden sharpens. You blink. And it becomes unbearable in its detail. Every leaf has veins that glow slightly at the edge. Every petal shivers, even in still air. You hear insects underground. Feel the garden wall's warmth on your back, though it's made of stone. Welcome to lucidity, she says. She lights a small bowl filled with dried blossoms. The smoke is blue-gray, and unlike anything you've inhaled before, it smells like bitter almonds, dust, and saffron. You sit in silence as it curls into your lungs. Then, suddenly, you remember something that never happened, or maybe it did, a conversation with a queen who died decades ago. Her words are so clear, so specific, that you can quote them. You do. The woman in yellow nods. That's one of the side effects. This isn't hallucination, it's retrieval, she explains. A particular flower, the blue hyacinth, when dried and distilled with wormwood and crushed gold leaf, doesn't distort the mind. It reveals buried patterns. Emotional fossils. In some cases, inherited memories. You've heard of this. The Celts once called it tongue of the dead. Roman healers claimed it granted ancestral access. The medieval church banned it outright, labeling it demonic, then quietly hoarded the dried bulbs in monastery vaults. Why me? You ask. She looks at you with no expression. Because you write, she says simply. And because you don't flinch. She rises. There's more. Come. You follow her through the hedges, past a crumbling statue of a weeping knight, to a gate hidden beneath a willow tree. Inside, a crypt, not grand. Not a tomb, more like a cellar. Dust-choked, candlelit, warm despite the earth above it. A round room, lined with shelves of clay jars and paper packets and bones wrapped in red twine. A man kneels in the center, arranging something on the floor. He doesn't look up. The woman in yellow kneels beside him and opens another bundle. You remain standing. The symbols they form on the floor, spirals, birds, mirrored numbers, are made not from chalk, but dried plants and powders. The air smells of clove and ink. They're not casting a spell, she says, they're casting a question. You don't laugh, because the garden veil still burns gently behind your eyes, and you feel like you're seeing the world's blueprint laid bare. They light a single candle, and begin to hum, low. Wordless. The sort of sound you'd expect to come from a cave or a sea trench. You watch, the shapes blur, but not in a dreamlike way, in a calculated, mechanical way. You feel like you're looking through a lens, being rotated slowly by unseen hands. You step forward, and for a moment, your feet disappear, not vanish, just lose certainty. The floor doesn't wobble. It just forgets to be there. You don't fall, you float, only an inch. Maybe less, but the woman sees it. You're tuned, she whispers. She gives you another vial. Green this time. You hesitate, but then you remember the bishop who forgot his guilt. The steward who confessed to crimes he couldn't pronounce. The king with his memory wine and his obsidian rings. You drink, and this time, the memory that surfaces isn't a flash or a hallucination. It's your mother's voice, years ago, asking you to pick rosemary for the stew, and you realize, for the first time, the rosemary was already blooming. She just wanted you out of the house. You weep, silently, because sometimes seeing clearly is more disorienting than any dream. The man finishes his arrangement and snuffs the candle. The moment breaks, everyone exhales. You leave the crypt with legs like thread, and for 3 nights, you do not write, you process. The 4th night, you find another note in your boot. This one says, harvest. In the garden, the woman is waiting with gloves and shears. You help her dig, prune, gather. The poppies are in bloom now, scarlet, like fire frozen in silk. They're not for sleep, she says. They're for remembering gently. You ask if that's the same thing. She smiles, and does not answer. Together, you distill, not for sale. Not for court manipulation, for ritual, 1 vial. 1 memory. 1 person, no 2 alike. She calls it, the tincture of what wasn't said. A poet drinks it and recalls a brother he never had, but feels he lost. A former knight remembers a horse that carried him through battle and then died nameless, unburied. A noblewoman weeps for a child who never existed, but whom she names aloud, over and over, between sobs, and you drink yours alone, on the same bench shaped like a serpent. You remember nothing, at first, then, 1 phrase, someone once told you, you see things too clearly. You'll suffer for it, you always assumed it was a curse. But now, maybe, it's the reason you're still here. The woman leaves before dawn. You find her poppy brooch left beside the bench, and her bundle of vials, empty. You bury it beneath the hyacinth bush, and as the sun rises, you realize, you are no longer just recording hallucinations, poisons, and altered states. You are documenting the archive of the forgotten, the minds rewritten, the memories replanted. The people unmade and remade through tincture and smoke-tinged. Songs sung in rootslick crypts. You are the chronicler of the nearly real, and history, it won't remember these people, but you will, because you were there, with ink-stained fingers and a head full of blue hyacinths. Writing the truth no one else would dare to inhale. Weeks pass, seasons begin to shift, barely, but noticeably. The garden's scent changes. The hyacinths lose their hold on the soil. New blooms arrive, wormwood, rue, something pale and spiny that smells like ash and lime. You still keep your 2 ledgers, 1 for the court, cleaner than ever. Sanitized of secrets. Smoothed for political comfort. That version gets copied. Filed. Forgotten, the other. Yours, it's heavier now. Not just in pages, but in weight. Emotional. Spiritual. Like each entry carries the breath of the person it describes. Not just what they did or said, but what they felt beneath the mask. You write about the girl who remembered a lullaby she never learned, the prince who saw his father's ghost not in a dream, but in a flame, the kitchen boy who sipped the wrong vial and swore he heard his future self whisper, "Leave now." He did. You haven't seen him since, and as you walk the halls of the palace, as more nobles arrive and more meetings blur into strategy and suspicion, you begin to notice who's been touched by the garden. Their eyes. Their timing. Their restraint. They've been somewhere else, they've seen something, they recognize you now, not as a scribe, but as a gardener of memory. The woman in yellow never returns, not physically, but sometimes you catch her scent, in a courtyard breeze, in the folds of someone's robe, in the sweet decay of a wilted bloom left on your windowsill, and once, just once, you find a single dried petal pressed between your ledgers, not left by accident, a signature, a benediction, a reminder. You carry on, not to report, but to preserve, because the mind is a garden, too. And you've learned how to tend it, gently, precisely, quietly. The sound that wakes you this time isn't birdsong or temple bells. It's a fountain, stone-lipped and marble-lined, whispering in the dark like a secret that's been waiting all night to be told. You're in Baghdad, at the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, and the city hums even before sunrise. The Tigris slinks nearby like a silver ribbon under the moonlight, and the domes above you, some green, some gold, some tiled with stars, seem to breathe with the heat left behind from yesterday's sun. No guards rouse you. No priest taps your shoulder. You awaken because the air is thinking. That's the only way to describe it. As though the thoughts of thousands, philosophers, cooks, lovers, thieves, have warmed the night air, and you're walking through their residue. Your sandals scrape a path through dates fallen from their trees. Spice lingers in your nose, cinnamon, cardamom, maybe saffron, but you can't tell whether it's real or something you dreamt when you rolled over on a silk cushion too fine for someone of your station. This is the house of wisdom, not just metaphorically. Literally, Beit al-Hikmah, you've been here for a week, sleeping near the translation rooms, halfway between two libraries and a quiet chamber reserved for those studying the heavens. Your job? Officially, copyist. But really? You were brought in because you can write fast. No one here wants slow scribes when knowledge is galloping in through scrolls. Papyri, and leather-bound texts sent from every edge of the known world, and the pages, they don't just hold Plato and Galen and Aristotle. They hold experiments, distillations, instructions, recipes, some of which, you quickly learn, are designed to bend the mind. You're assigned to copy a manuscript on optics, but what you really notice are the annotations, side notes in faded Persian and looping Syriac, vision altered after elixir, aura appeared near candlelight, see account of blue vapor in enclosed chamber. You ask no questions. Because in this place, even questions are weighted. Instead, you begin to track which scholars speak in code. Who uses scent of juniper to mean cannabis resin? Who refers to the orange extract as something that temporarily reveals invisible ink and unlocks recurring dreams about past lives? You also notice who always carries water with them, specifically, a silver flask engraved with 7 concentric circles and a single word, Tadhacker. Memory, not just remembrance, but the act of recollecting something true that had been hidden. You make a mental note, then you accidentally spill ink over a copy of Kitab al-Kawas, a text on the hidden properties of plants. As you blot it frantically, the page underneath becomes readable, revealing diagrams of root systems arranged like human lungs, with footnotes describing how different combinations influence breath, heartbeat, and receptiveness to divine geometry. Your supervisor isn't angry, he simply whispers, if the ink reveals, let it reveal. You're reassigned the next day, your new post, observing sessions, not leading. Not recording, watching, because the Abbasids aren't just translating Greek knowledge, they're testing it. Modifying it. Embedding it into their world, their language, their cosmology. One evening, you're escorted into a side garden, where white sand has been smoothed into a spiral. At the center stands a copper brazier, smoldering with a mixture of cedar resin, dried myrrh, and something so sweet it makes your ears ring. A man sits beside it. Blindfolded, he's humming softly, he's not restrained. He doesn't appear confused. But his hands are resting on tablets, wax, clay, and paper, each etched with shapes he supposedly cannot see. A scribe murmurs, third cycle. With the Kasha blend. You're given a tablet. Not to read, to listen to. The scribe turns it in the flames glow, and the grooves sing faintly. This is sound writing, he explains. For subjects whose vision detaches. Detaches, You say nothing. The blindfolded man begins to draw a diagram, circles inside triangles inside squares. They're precise. They shouldn't be. He shouldn't know what he's sketching. You stare. A scholar beside you leans in. He ingested saffron oil. Purified 3 times. They say it allows one to see through time. Not forward. Not back. But around. Historians still argue whether these accounts are exaggerated. Whether the substances used, many of them rooted in Greco-Arab pharmacology, truly induced mystical experiences, or just severe physiological responses interpreted as spiritual. But in that garden, as the flames flicker and the man completes his 7th perfect hexagon, no one doubts what's happening, not even you. Later, in the house's eastern wing, you meet a woman who works only at night. She wears gloves at all times, and her eyes are nearly silver with age or something else. Her specialty? Perfumed tinctures that trigger what she calls ancestral clarity. A drop under the tongue, and some scholars claim to remember verses of languages they never learned. You ask if you can try, she says, not yet. Instead, she sends you to observe a group studying Kalonjan, a root used for memory, breath, and, supposedly, dreaming while awake. The men drink it with honey. One woman steeps it in black tea. Another boils it down into a vapor and inhales it while meditating on an astrolabe. They don't hallucinate, they illuminate. Charts emerge that should take weeks to calculate, mapped in a single sitting. One scholar composes an entire philosophical treatise in a day. Another corrects an error in a Greek text copied 6 generations ago, without referencing it. You blink. You scribble, you breathe in the lingering steam of their elixirs, and for a moment, you think you can recite the stars in order of brightness, not from memory, but from intimacy. The next day, you're asked if you've had the dream. You haven't. They nod. Soon. The dream, you learn, is a side effect experienced by those who have been in the house too long. It involves walking across a bridge made of glass, where books float beside you like lanterns, and each one opens to reveal something you once knew but forgot. Some call it prophecy. Others say it's the mind reflecting itself in perfect light. You're assigned new robes, white, with indigo stitching. You don't remember asking for them, you wear them anyway, because by now, you're not just observing, you're participating. Your name is quietly added to the rolls of those permitted to enter the lower vaults, there, beneath carved arches and vaults cooled by underground water channels. Are the scrolls deemed too volatile for general study? Recipes for lucid states. Records of experiments that yielded undesired duplication of identity. Maps annotated with locations of caves where language was said to collapse into pure color. You're told not to copy, only to witness, and so you sit, with the others, in silence, and read. Some scrolls smell of jasmine, others, salt and wet stone. One, when opened, hums, not like a chant, like electricity hasn't been invented yet, but is whispering through time just to say, you're getting closer. A week passes, then another. You no longer sleep like you used to, you drift, you hover in the threshold between waking and dreaming, where someone's voice is always reciting something you haven't read, but are writing in your mind as it's spoken. And one night, you realize the fountain that woke you your first morning, it's saying something, you just never listened close enough. You lean toward it, its voice is clear now. What you call memory is just sleep that learned how to hold its breath. You laugh, and the fountain bubbles louder. The woman with silver eyes finds you the next morning. You're ready, she says. She gives you the tiniest vial yet, no color. No scent, just water, some say, she adds. But not from here. You drink it. The city still hums, the stars still shimmer, but you feel a thread pull taut between your temples, and suddenly, you're back in the garden. With the brazier. And the blindfolded man. And the tablets, except this time, you're him. You wake, hours. Days. Later, on the mosaic floor. Someone has placed your notes beside you. They're not in your handwriting, but you understand every word. Your name is at the bottom, followed by a word you don't remember learning, iltibas, it means reflection, or echo, the house of wisdom is quieter now, scholars rotate more slowly, words weigh more, and the city seems to know your name, though no one says it aloud, you leave your room unlocked. You no longer fear forgetting, because now, memory follows you, like incense that clings, like a dream that isn't done with you yet, the parchment arrives without ceremony, no seal. No ribbon. Just an unassuming square folded 6 times and smelling faintly of cedar. You find it tucked beneath the basin in your chamber, next to a jar of rosewater and a pile of unfinished notes that no longer feel like yours. One word written in steady Kufic script across the center, Alamat. You don't ask how it got there. You've stopped asking that about most things now, because in a world where memories write themselves and fountains whisper philosophy, the arrival of a folded note feels less like a message and more like a summons. You travel northwest through Persia under the guise of a merchant's assistant. Nights are cold and starlit, days baked with saffron wind. You learn quickly to stay quiet, to notice which villagers avert their eyes when you mention certain roads, which border guards smell your breath for herbs instead of wine. When you finally see the fortress, it appears like something imagined too vividly to be false. Alamat, the eagle's nest, a stronghold wrapped in stone and legend, high in the Elburz mountains. Historians still argue whether it was more monastery than military base. More think tank than hideout, more hallucination than reality. But you stand at the gates, dust in your boots, a slip of cedar-scented parchment still tucked against your ribs, and someone is waiting for you, not in robes, not in armor, a child, maybe 13, barefoot, holding a small clay pot with a single red flower blooming from it. He says nothing. Just turns and begins walking. You follow. You don't ask if you've been expected. At Alamat, everyone is expected. The interior is quieter than you imagined. No monks chanting. No bells. Just the hush of wind over stone and the occasional clink of water into a basin somewhere behind a screen. You're led to a room with no door. Just a beaded curtain and a table inside, set with bread, dates, and 3 tiny vials of colored liquid. Red, green, and a blue so dark it nearly looks black. You sit. No one joins you. There is no explanation, just a small piece of parchment folded under the plate of bread. This one says, only one. You wait 3 hours before choosing, and when you finally do, you reach for the green, because you remember what green did in the garden, the grounding, the pull, the way it rewrote grief into clarity. You drink, and nothing happens, at first, but as you step beyond the beads, the world begins to shift, not spin, clarify. You see a man standing in a far corridor. And you realize, he's you. Or rather, he's your body, walking 5 steps ahead. You watch yourself take a turn you haven't made yet, and then he's gone. You catch up, and find only your shadow waiting. Later, in a chamber lit by oil lamps and painted with precise renderings of trees you've never seen, a woman with ink-stained hands asks you to recount what just happened. You tell her everything. She doesn't take notes, she simply smiles. The green doesn't reveal truth, she says. It reveals possibility. She leads you into another chamber. This one does have chanting, soft. Wordless. Circular, the people here are seated on cushions. Some old. Some young. Some genderless in a way you cannot explain, but immediately understand. Before each of them, a small object, a comb, a candle, a spoon, a feather, and in the center of the room, a glass bowl filled with what looks like saffron thread steeping in milk. They are not eating, they are remembering. The objects are anchors, you're told. They choose something ordinary. Then they sip the milk. Then they wait, and then the objects speak, not aloud. Not in language. But in flashes of memory unconnected to their own lives. The woman beside you holds a dull iron nail. She weeps quietly for 5 minutes, then laughs, then weeps again. No one comforts her. That would disturb the unfolding. The saffron blend, one scholar later explains, is not drugged in the traditional sense. It's harvested from a specific valley in the east, grown under constant moonlight and never touched by iron. Mixed with goat's milk and honey, it does not distort perception, it opens the filing cabinet, that's the phrase they use, and some drawers don't belong to you. Historians still debate whether the famed assassins of Alamout, Ashen, were truly drug devotees or simply radicalized tacticians. The term hashish eater may have been a smear invented by outsiders. But what's clear to you, sitting in this room of trembling objects and slow weeping, is that altered states were never the goal, they were a means, a rehearsal space for decisions too big to make sober, and sometimes, those rehearsals became belief. You don't try the milk, not yet, instead, you're led to the archive, Alamout's deepest vault. Here, the texts are different, not translations, not records, they're instructions, on fear, on silence, on planting an idea in someone's mind so delicately, they think it grew there on its own. Some are written in mirror script. Some in code that only makes sense when wet. Some in ink that erases itself after reading, unless you breathe out a certain word while finishing the final. You begin to understand what this place truly is, not a fortress, not a monastery, it's a training ground for reality engineers, the plants they grow. Designed not just to alter the mind, but to test it. To see which recruits return from the saffron milk intact. Which ones mistake the memory for the mission. Which ones understand that memory itself is just strategy in disguise. You stay for 9 days, each day, you're given a task, harvest this herb, translate this page, observe this ritual and say nothing. Each day, you complete your task, each night, a new note appears on your cot, sometimes folded, sometimes rolled, always unsigned. Day 5, the red reveals desire. Not yours. Day 6, to erase a memory, write it in blue, then burn it in silence. Day 7, you already drank the blue. Last year. That last one unsettles you, you stare at it until your candle burns out. The 8th day, you're summoned to a rooftop garden, at its center stands a tall figure, back turned to you, reciting something to the wind. He turns. You recognize him, the blindfolded man from the House of Wisdom, except he's not blindfolded, and his eyes are clearer than yours. He smiles. You wrote me down, he says. Now I write you. He walks past, you don't turn, you don't move. That night, you sit alone in the courtyard, no one disturbs you, even the guards pretend you aren't there. And you realize, you've become something now, not a scribe, not a witness, not a student, an archive, walking, breathing, remembering not just for yourself, but for those who can't afford to anymore. You leave Alamout before sunrise on the 10th day, no farewell, no instructions, just a pouch of dried threads, one small clay tablet etched with your own name backwards, and a single word carved into its edge, Mumkin. It means possible, or perhaps, it means, now you know. You return to Baghdad a stranger in your own sandals, the House of Wisdom welcomes you back, no questions, no nods. Just your cushion waiting by the fountain, you sit, and listen again. This time, the fountain says, what you forget is not always lost. Some things return when you're ready to remember them on purpose. You open your notebook, you write that down, and begin again. The wind in Baghdad feels different now. It still carries cumin and crushed mint and the low burn of street-grilled lamb, but it also whispers names, yours, though no one speaks it. You walk past familiar alleys and find the shadows a little thinner. The dates that fall near the library gate seem to land in deliberate patterns, like punctuation on a page you've been writing in your sleep. The house has changed. Or perhaps only your vision of it has. The books breathe differently. Their pages feel closer. The scribes nod as you pass. Some leave margins blank when they know you'll read the text later, space for you to add what wasn't said, and sometimes, late at night, you hear things from deep within the vaults, voices reciting in no known language, syllables shaped like math or music, and you understand just enough to know not to interrupt. You keep the saffron threads hidden inside your ink pouch. You've yet to use them, not because you fear what they'll reveal, but because you're saving them, for the moment when memory fails you. When you need to remember something no one ever told you. When the truth has gone quiet, you carry Alamat with you now, not the place, the function. You're no longer just chronicling what happened, you're preparing people for what they forgot happened. You become the footnote to things too large for the page, and when people look at you now, they don't see a scribe, they see a question mark in motion, a gentle invitation to remember something they never knew they lost, and you smile. Because you finally understand, history doesn't repeat itself, it waits to be reawakened. You're in Venice now, but not the Venice you know from postcards and honeymoon montages. This is Venice in its earliest hours, before gondoliers sing, before tourists spill over stone bridges, before the bells call anyone to prayer. The water slaps softly against barnacled brick. The fog is still yawning its way through the alleys. And you're already awake. You weren't supposed to be here, your journey westward was meant to end in Tunis. A passing scholar in Baghdad had spoken of a North African apothecary said to preserve dreams in clay pots. You followed the rumor. But somewhere in Alexandria, a different rumor pulled you sideways, about Venice, about a masked doctor who doesn't treat the sick. He treats the delirious, so you came. As you always do, and here you are, trailing a gondola rowed by a silent figure wearing gloves in July, past windows shuttered not against the cold, but against witnesses. The boat stops at a crumbling palazzo overgrown with ivy that smells faintly of laudanum. You step off, you're not greeted, you're simply absorbed. The entryway is tiled with eyes, ceramic, blue and brown and green, each unblinking. Some are cracked. Some are warm from the last sunlight they'll ever know. A servant in a waxed mask nods you into a library where no books are shelved. Instead, mirrors. Hundreds. All shapes. All sizes. None reflect you fully. Some seem to reflect only your hands. Others delay your motion by several seconds. One shows a younger version of you, blinking, writing something you haven't written yet. You don't speak, because this place feels older than language. The doctor finally appears, tall, dressed in a plague mask lacquered in deep maroon. His robe is stitched with tiny Latin phrases that say things like vital shimmer and ex humo memoria, from the dirt, memory. He doesn't ask why you've come, he tells you to follow him to the conservatory. You obey. Inside, hundreds of plants, most of them illegal in at least 6 provinces. Some are curled in protective spirals, others move when you get too close. There's one that smells like clean parchment and another that seems to breathe out sighs of regret. These are not medicines, the doctor explains through a tube embedded in the beak of his mask. They're repositories. You ask, for what? States, he says simply, states of mind. States of possibility. Fear. Love. Regression. Lucidity. Some of these plants were grown in dreams and coaxed into the waking world with breath alone. You think he's joking, he isn't. He offers you a small glass jar filled with pale green spores. This one encourages what we call mirrored memory. You don't relive your own moments. You live someone else's. A kind of psychic tourism. You decline. For now, instead, you agree to observe. That's why you're allowed to stay. The next room is quieter. More clinical. 4 patients lie on couches. 1 man, 2 women, 1 person whose features drift slightly in your periphery. None of them speak. All are wired with silk cords that link their fingertips to tiny bowls of water. At timed intervals, a drop of something falls into each bowl. The doctor notes their pulses. This is called the sighing circuit, he tells you. They are not trying to feel better. They are trying to feel again. These are all people who have lost whole decades. Not to disease. To trauma. To the kind of forgetting that begins as self-defense and becomes permanent. You ask if it works, he shrugs, sometimes. When the memory doesn't resist. You write that down, because it echoes something you once heard in Alamat, the idea that memories are not erased, only retreated from. Later, you're shown the index, a room filled not with scrolls, but with scented powders kept in stoppered glass. The smell before betrayal. Laughter before drowning. Touch of a mother who knew she would die soon. You ask how these were gathered. Some were dreamed. Some were extracted from the linens of the dead. You're offered one to try. You choose, unwritten goodbye. The assistant places a dusting on your wrist. You inhale, and instantly, your heart stumbles. You remember walking away from someone you can't now name, but whom your body still grieves for. A scent. A hand. The sound of them almost calling after you, but not quite. You open your eyes, and the world seems slightly older. You don't cry, but you feel close to it, like a stone about to crack after centuries of pressure. The doctor nods approvingly. That means the vein is open. You'll start remembering more now. And you do, not just from your life, from others, someone else's funeral, someone else's garden. A room you've never seen, but now could draw with total accuracy, including the knife on the table and the bowl of sugared lemons. Over the next few days, you observe more experiments. One subject is submerged in salt water infused with crushed violet petals. The doctor calls it a womb bath, intended to reconnect the subject with the moment just before birth. Another wears a mask fitted with mirrored lenses while listening to a pulse slowed down to the pace of grief. You ask what the purpose is. To sync mourning with memory, the assistant replies. To stop resisting. You begin to notice a pattern. These procedures aren't about pain or escape, they're about precision. Fine-tuning access to emotional archives, like plucking a single thread from a tapestry and knowing the whole weave from its color. There's a reason the Republic tolerates this place, because behind the plants and pulses and poetic powders, something else is happening, intelligence gathering. The people who walk out of here remember things no one else should know, codes, maps, conversations whispered in terror. One patient wakes screaming in Persian. She's Venetian. Doesn't speak the language. But what she describes, a conspiracy that matches a scribe's record from 20 years ago in Isfahan. Another man begins to paint after his fourth session, not portraits, blueprints, schematics of cities that haven't yet been built, but later are, and you're still just watching, until the doctor invites you to his own chamber. It's smaller than expected. Cluttered. Lit with candles made of wax infused with nettle oil and ash. He sits across from you, removes the beaked mask for the first time, and reveals a face you almost recognize, not from Baghdad, not from Alamut, from a dream, or a version of you that once asked a different question. You've been collecting, he says. But you haven't yet released. You say nothing, because you have been hoarding, not just pages. People, feelings, echoes. You ask what he means by release. He hands you a vial, no label, no scent, just a clear liquid that shifts when tilted, like mercury. If it wept, this is called the refrain. It doesn't reveal. It doesn't distort. It equalizes. It lets you view everything you've gathered, at once. You hesitate. Won't that break me? He tilts his head. Only if you try to hold it. Let it pass through. You wait until dusk, then you drink, and suddenly, you're not in Venice, you're everywhere. You're a monk with ink-stained hands trying to remember a hymn before his mind goes blank. You're a mother burying a child she never got to name. You're a soldier forgetting how to hold a sword. You're the steward clutching honeyed dates. You're the blindfolded man under the hyacinth's blue flame. You're the woman who named a child who never lived. You're the scribe writing your own name for the last time. And through it all, one phrase pulses, spoken in many tongues, but always the same shape. We are not what we remember. We are what we choose to remember. The room stills, your pulse returns, you are back in Venice, and the doctor is gone, only his robe remains, folded. Neat. Waiting, you pick it up, and tucked in its sleeve, a mirror the size of a coin. When you look into it, you see your own face, writing, always writing, and just behind you, flickering faintly, every other version of you that ever dared to remember something that hurt. You leave before dawn, you carry nothing, except your pages, and the mirror, and the taste of a goodbye that was never spoken aloud. You arrive in Chang'an under the pretense of illness, not that you're sick. But there's only one way to gain access to the Hall of Auspicious Documents, and it requires a physician's note claiming persistent cognitive dissonance resulting from exposure to unresolved histories. The scholar bureaucrats accept it, not because it's true, but because it's too specific not to be believable. And so you are admitted, first to the outer courts, where officials in midnight blue robes trace maps onto silk with brushes the width of your finger. Then to the lesser archives, where tiny drawers contain even tinier papers, some no larger than a fingernail, folded 12 times, scented with wax, and labeled in a dialect spoken only in one province, for one generation, 5 dynasties ago, and then finally, to the hall. The Hall of Auspicious Documents is neither hall nor auspicious, it is a vault, carved into the side of a cliff. Cooled by earth. Illuminated not by lanterns, but by sunlight refracted through bronze mirrors, strategically angled to avoid direct exposure. The mirrors are cleaned daily, by hand, only eunuchs are permitted to touch them. You're not here to read census reports or irrigation records, though both are stored here in scrolls wrapped so tightly they creak like bamboo in winter. You're here for the burnt ledgers. You didn't know they existed until a monk in Venice whispered it in his sleep after drinking something meant to help him forget, but they do exist, filed under a false name. The records of unusable fortunes. They're kept in a corner, bound in ash-dyed twine, stored in lacquered boxes that smell of camphor and something faintly metallic, inside. Documents that were meant to be destroyed, orders reversed, edicts retracted, decrees that punished the wrong people, or the right ones at the wrong time, and scattered among them, notes of correction. Scribbled in margins. Some by clerks. Some by what seem to be victims. One, you find, is a love letter written over a forged tax exemption, but the most curious are the ghost entries, entries written in clear, formal prose, by no hand anyone can trace, dated accurately, filed correctly, but referencing events no historian remembers happening, like the Festival of Paper Tears, said to have been held once in spring to mourn unborn emperors. Or the disappearance of a neighborhood that once stood near the south gate, complete with names of families. Property taxes, and a recorded rainfall the day they vanished. You're told not to copy them, you do anyway. You hide your versions inside hollowed bamboo slips filled with dried lotus seeds, a common talisman of future knowledge no one bothers to inspect. But something else draws your attention, the way these ghost entries overlap, as if multiple realities were written on the same surface and only some of the ink dried properly. One speaks of a law requiring all children to memorize the emperor's dreams, another outlines a method by which sorrow can be measured in weight, suspended from jade scales calibrated to the voice of the grieving. You bring these to an old woman said to be the last living record chantress. She listens to you recite the entries, then falls silent, then begins to sing. The words do not rhyme, they do not repeat, but somehow, they echo. Those were songs, she says finally. Not records. Songs that were too powerful to survive in sound, so they were disguised as administrative errors. You return to the hall the next morning, and discover your reading space has been moved, deeper, near the back, to a section marked not by a sign, but by the absence of one. Here, you're shown the imperial harmonization scrolls. Ostensibly, they're treaties, documents intended to standardize rituals across the provinces, but they read like pharmaceutical instructions. Each one lists ingredients: verbena, ox gall, phoenix ash, powdered cinnabar, followed by ritual timings, movement sequences, and expected emotional side effects. One specifies, if taken on a humid morning, the subject may briefly remember what their ancestors feared most. You're startled, because just last week, in Venice, you experienced a vision of running through reeds as flames licked the sky, a memory you knew wasn't yours, and now it's documented here. You ask the archivist if these documents were ever tested. He doesn't answer, just turns a page, and you see it, a diagram, of a person holding a scroll, inside their chest, 7 knots, each labeled with an emotion: fear, joy, pity, arrogance, shame, wonder, and sweet forgetting. that last one is inked in gold. Historians still argue whether the Ming courts truly pursued psychoactive ritualism, or whether these documents were merely metaphor. But in the vault's dim light, the line between metaphor and method begins to fade. You're invited, reluctantly, to a demonstration, held beneath the hall, in a chamber shaped like a tear. There are no windows, only a ring of candles made from pressed chrysanthemum and dried plum pit. A woman sits in the center, blindfolded, her wrists wrapped in red silk soaked in wine and pine ash. Before her, 3 small bowls, each containing a different incense cone. One by one, the cones are lit. First, verbena, she begins to hum. Second, musk, she begins to speak, in a dialect you don't recognize but understand anyway. Third, sulfur and powdered bone, she stops, her head tilts, and then she begins to recite what sounds like a tax report, but it's not, it's a coded narrative, each number a character, each figure a memory, and you realize, this is how some stories survived. By disguising themselves as boring data, no one would burn a rice census, but if that census was also a lullaby for the daughter of a trader, then it lives forever. You stay for hours, no one asks you to leave. When you return to the surface, the light has shifted. The mirrors cast a softer gold. The air tastes of sandalwood and something like sorrow. You sit beside one of the clerks and ask how many scrolls are songs in hiding. He shrugs. We stopped counting when the emperor stopped caring. You leave the hall with nothing in your hands, but your breath feels heavier, your memory warmer, and when someone later asks what Chang'an taught you, you smile. It taught you how to read the silences between numbers. And that's where the real stories live. You don't return to the hall the next day, not because you're barred, but because something has changed, inside you, around you. On the walk back to your lodging near the Vermilion Bird Gate, you begin noticing things you hadn't before. The rhythm of the street sweeper's brooms, too measured. The way an old man's birdcage glints at dusk, almost like a signaling mirror. The carved dragons on temple lintels, one of them missing a scale, and that absence echoing something from a scroll you weren't supposed to read. It dawns on you that Chang'an itself may be a ledger, not a city, but a code, a breathing administrative record, disguised as boulevards. Shaded pavilions, and street noodles so fragrant they hide the weight of history under garlic and steam. You pass a group of children playing with sticks and pebbles arranged in a perfect octagon. You ask what they're doing. They say, listening for the emperor's dream. You stop in your tracks, because that phrase, those exact words, came from a ghost ledger in the hall. You kneel. You ask them where they heard it. They shrug. It's just a game, one girl says, but her eyes say otherwise. That night, you dream of a parade where everyone wears robes stitched from bureaucratic ledgers. As they walk, the ink begins to smudge, and words crawl from their fabric onto the cobblestones, rearranging themselves into poetry that no one dares read aloud. You wake just before dawn, dizzy with knowing. There are no more appointments to make, no scrolls to request, so you return one final time, not to the hall, to the riverbank where old clerks go to burn documents unfit for the official record. It's not a ceremony. It's a quiet necessity. You watch as an old man, his top knot trembling in the breeze, feeds parchment into flame without even looking. He catches you watching, and for a long time, he says nothing. Then, you're not really here for the words. Are you? You say no, you're here for what words couldn't hold. He nods, then hands you a scrap of ash-blurred paper, still warm from fire. Only 2 characters remain unburned. Sure, to know, G, to record, but you understand them now as something else entirely. To witness, to hold, not just the fact, but the feeling, the part no record ever dares admit aloud. You leave Chang'an with fewer answers than when you arrived, but with one unshakable truth folded quietly between your ribs. Some archives aren't kept in stone chambers or lacquered vaults. They're passed from breath to breath, between whispers, between games played in dust, between a silence in a scroll and a girl who calls it play. You are one such archive now, and the city knows it. The wind smells different when you leave, more layered, as if it, too, remembers. The air in Prague tastes like iron and mothballs. you arrive by accident, or perhaps not. A wrong turn during a caravan rest in Vienna, a misread posting at the Imperial Crossroads, a coin that landed the wrong way up. But you know by now, accidents are often the universe's way of shuffling pages it doesn't want you to read in order, so you don't fight it. The city is colder than expected, not just in temperature, but in manner. Its rooftops seem to bristle with secrets, and its windows close just a bit too quickly when you pass. Prague does not welcome you so much as permit your presence. Even so, you feel watched, not with malice, but with expectation. As if someone, somewhere, is waiting to see whether you will remember what you never meant to forget. You're given lodging in a convent-turned-dormitory for imperial alchemists. The walls are damp with intention, every corner smells faintly of sulfur, wax, and desperation. The woman who checks you in wears gloves made of embroidered parchment. You try not to stare at the faint glyphs stitched into her cuffs, but you recognize at least 3 symbols from the forbidden treaties in Chang'an. She sees you noticing. She says, "You can read ink, but can you hear it?" You don't answer. Not yet. The next morning, you are taken, without explanation, to the Tower of the Forgotten Emperors, not listed on any map. Not mentioned in any tour. A door at the base is painted shut, but you don't use the door. You use the window 3 floors up, where a rope has been discreetly placed behind an angel statue with one broken wing. Inside, the air is thick, with dust, with breath held too long, with stories buried under gold leaf and lies. The guide, a man with no eyebrows and teeth stained black from walnut husks, tells you the tower houses the relics of rulers who never officially existed, not puppets. He clarifies. Ghost administrators. Appointed to blame. You ask why, because sometimes the real ruler needed a scapegoat. A policy that failed. A famine that couldn't be explained. Easy. Invent an emperor. Forge a death certificate. Blame the ghost. Move on. You are shown rooms filled with masks, each mounted above a parchment, each parchment bearing a single imperial seal. You realize with a cold jolt, these aren't relics, they're identities, constructed, used, then erased, and yet, they persist. You feel the weight of them pressing against your ribs as you move through the tower. In one room, a false throne sits beneath a canopy of bat bones strung together with silk thread. The sign reads, "For dreams unfit for daylight." You don't sit, but you feel it pull at you, as if memory itself is magnetic. And you're made of old filings. Later, you're taken to a chamber called the Archive of Failed Prophecies. Here, the documents are not stored, they're performed. Each evening, a different actor reads one aloud, often in costume, sometimes accompanied by a lute or a caged animal said to hold the counterpoint. You watch one woman recite a prophecy in which the moon falls into the Vltava River and turns all fish into tiny bureaucrats. The audience claps, not because they believe it, but because belief is not the point. Documentation is. Each prophecy, no matter how absurd, is logged, stamped, and cross-indexed, in triplicate. You ask why. Your host replies, because someday one of these prophecies will come true. And when it does, the city will already have a file. You stay in Prague longer than expected, because it keeps unfolding, like a box with too many hinges. You meet a man who claims to map dreams, not his own, but those of buildings. He hands you a parchment that shows a street that never existed but which you walk down the next morning without intending to. You meet a woman who writes apologies on silk fans and leaves them in graveyards. She says the dead don't care about truth, but they appreciate remorse. You visit a hall where only names are stored, names no one uses anymore. A policy that failed. A famine that couldn't be explained. Easy. Invent an emperor. Forge a death certificate. Blame the ghost. Move on. You are shown rooms filled with masks, each mounted above a parchment, each parchment bearing a single imperial seal. You realize with a cold jolt, these aren't relics, they're identities, constructed, used, then erased, and yet, they persist. You feel the weight of them pressing against your ribs as you move through the tower. In one room, a false throne sits beneath a canopy of bat bones strung together with silk thread. The sign reads, "For dreams unfit for daylight." You don't sit, but you feel it pull at you, as if memory itself is magnetic. And you're made of old filings. Later, you're taken to a chamber called the Archive of Failed Prophecies. Here, the documents are not stored, they're performed. Each evening, a different actor reads one aloud, often in costume, sometimes accompanied by a lute or a caged animal said to hold the counterpoint. You watch one woman recite a prophecy in which the moon falls into the Vltava river and turns all fish into tiny bureaucrats. The audience claps, not because they believe it, but because belief is not the point. Documentation is. Each prophecy, no matter how absurd, is logged, stamped, and cross-indexed, in triplicate. You ask why. Your host replies, because someday one of these prophecies will come true. And when it does, the city will already have a file. You stay in Prague longer than expected, because it keeps unfolding, like a box with too many hinges. You meet a man who claims to map dreams, not his own, but those of buildings. He hands you a parchment that shows a street that never existed but which you walk down the next morning without intending to. You meet a woman who writes apologies on silk fans and leaves them in graveyards. She says the dead don't care about truth, but they appreciate remorse. You visit a hall where only names are stored, names no one uses anymore. Names that once started wars, names that were uttered only once during a coronation and then buried under oaths. They hang from cords like wind chimes. One of them hums when you get too close, and you remember a promise you never made, but would have, if you'd been given the chance. Historians still argue whether Prague's alchemists were ever sanctioned by the empire, or whether they operated in the margins, blessed only by absence. But as you sit in the garden of a monastery turned laboratory, watching bees land on blossoms shaped like astrological symbols, you suspect the truth is more subtle. The empire used them, but never admitted it, because to admit that memory and matter are mutable, that sorrow can be distilled, that regret has density, that names have weight, would be to confess something terrifying, that history isn't written, it's grown, fed with chemicals and prayers, spliced together, sometimes poisoned, often perfumed, never stable. You help a group of scribes catalog a new ritual ledger. It's not a book, but a sequence of gestures meant to be repeated while walking through a specific gate on a rainy Tuesday. They tell you it resets guilt. You try it, you don't feel cleansed, but you feel empty, in a clean way, like a bowl rinsed after a long meal. At night, the city dreams under copper rooftops, and you listen. You hear the towers murmur. You hear footsteps from apartments that have no tenants. You hear bells that ring in wrong time, 13 chimes at dusk. 2:30 at noon. Prague does not bend to chronology, it chews it, swallows, then coughs it back up sideways. On your last day, you are shown one final place, no name, no guard, just a door carved with the face of Janus, god of beginnings and endings. Inside, a chair, a candle, a mirror. You are told, sit. You are told, wait. You are told, someone will visit. You wait an hour, then the mirror fogs, and in it, you see not yourself, but versions, you as a child, scribbling on a clay tablet. You as an old scribe, hands shaking as you erase a name. You as someone you've never met, but who looks at you with familiar grief. You understand, this is not just reflection, this is inventory, and you are nearing full. The mirror clears, you rise, and behind the chair, you find a single scrap of paper, 3 words, in Czech, in Latin, in whatever language you need them to be. They say, don't stop remembering. You take the paper, and step out into sunlight so pale it feels imagined, but the cobblestones beneath your feet are warm, and real, and worn smooth by centuries of people who, like you, came to Prague chasing something they could never quite name, and left carrying what they didn't know they needed. But you don't leave the city right away. You wander for a few more days, half out of curiosity, half out of reluctance. Something in Prague asks not to be rushed. It's not just the alleys that loop back into themselves, or the bridges that hum with footsteps long gone. It's the feeling that you're still being watched, not from behind, but from beneath. there's a rumor that beneath the cobbled streets and crypt-chilled cathedrals lies a second Prague. An echo city. One built from forgotten blueprints and discarded rituals. Some say it's a reflection. Others say it's a projection, a version of Prague grown from memory alone, flickering just out of sync with the waking world. You don't find this second city. But in the Jewish quarter, you see shadows that turn corners faster than the bodies that cast them. In a bathhouse basement, you overhear two women speaking in numbers. You pass a painter who works only in white, canvases thick with brushstrokes you can't see unless the light hits them wrong. When you ask what she's painting, she says, regret. It looks like nothing until you remember it. On your last night, you return to the tower. You climb the staircase slowly, trailing your fingers along the stone wall, warm where the names once were. At the top, the false throne remains. Empty, you sit, not to claim, just to rest, and as you do, something shifts, not in the room, but in you, a silence. A settling, like your memory has found a shelf to rest on, not to be forgotten, just archived. The candlelight flickers, the shadows sigh, and outside, the bells ring 12.5 times, because Prague always keeps a little for itself. The last place you visit doesn't appear on any itinerary. There are no trains, no ports, no dusty caravans or lacquered gondolas to take you there. You arrive only because you stop arriving anywhere else. You sleep beneath the waxing moon one night with the parchment from Prague folded under your head like a borrowed prayer. And when you wake, you're here, wherever here is. The terrain is barren, but not dead. The soil is dark, spongy, with the faint scent of dried ink and crushed time. The air smells like old pages, slightly brittle, oddly comforting. It reminds you of libraries that no longer exist, scrolls that never should have survived but somehow did. You walk, not because there's a path, but because your body remembers the motion. The horizon remains flat. The sun doesn't rise, it just brightens, slowly, like a lantern shielded by gauze. Time slips sideways, loses its grip on meaning. Your heartbeat no longer syncs with seconds, but with something older. Cycles. Pulses. Maybe memory itself. Eventually, you find the building. You don't know how long you've been walking, only that the terrain has grown quieter, not in sound, but in emotion. Like everything has already been felt here and set aside gently. The building has no doors, just arches. Inside, silence that hums. Like a bell just after being rung, long after the sound should have faded. This place isn't a monastery, it's not a temple, it's not a palace, but it carries traces of each. The walls are polished stone, etched with languages that never formed full alphabets. The floor is packed earth, pressed by uncountable barefoot visitors. The ceiling? There isn't one. Just a veil of mist suspended impossibly in midair, undisturbed by wind, glowing faintly with what looks like constellations but don't quite match any sky you know. In the center stands a low table. No books, no scrolls, only mirrors. Some are cracked, some still fogged from someone's breath, perhaps long ago, perhaps only seconds before you entered. You don't touch them, you know better now. Instead, you sit, you wait. It's not long before someone joins you, not a figure, not a person, a presence. You feel them more than you see them, warm, immense, familiar in a way you can't name. Like an older version of your own doubt, grown patient. They say nothing, but you hear something anyway. You've gathered enough. You try to protest. You're not done. There are still margins to fill. Still names to trace. Still histories to unwind and retwine and translate and seal in soft cloth so they don't bruise with air. But the presence is kind and firm. You've gathered enough. They gesture, not with hands, but with invitation. One of the mirrors lifts gently into the air, tilts toward you. It doesn't show your face, it shows every moment you almost forgot. The little boy drawing stars on the edge of a school slate, the girl burying her first diary in a box under the fig tree. The scholar folding her love letters into palimpsests because she had no safer place to keep them, the prisoner singing lullabies to no one, the mother reading aloud to an empty cradle, the soldier who couldn't remember his brother's face, until the final breath, the scribe, trembling, writing their own name in reverse for the first time in decades. They're all there, none of them you, and yet, all of them are, not reincarnations. Not ancestors, not projections, but echoes you agreed to carry. You see it now, your whole journey, Baghdad, Alamat, Chang'an, Venice, Prague, was never about collecting. The ink has dried for the night. The parchment waits, unworried. There's no deadline now, no emperor to impress, no ritual to rehearse. Just you. The hum of your pulse. The soft thrum of everything you've ever loved still echoing gently inside your chest, and if sleep comes soon, let it. If it takes a while, that's okay too. You've already done more than enough. You remembered, you listened, and you stayed, so let the lights go soft, let your body grow heavier, let the page turn without you, because the story will still be here when you wake, and for now, you can rest. Good night. Sweet dreams.